Yeah, we're ready to go. Okay, cool. So I'm Robert Louis from Tru Thoughts, and I'm joined by Andy, Mr Scruff. And I kindly asked, or I asked you, and you were kind enough. I've been offering to do a little mentoring scheme, and I get asked a lot about DJing. And I asked you about maybe if we could have a chat, just maybe
Mm.
tell your journey about DJing, and maybe just to try and give some advice to people up and coming, maybe people who are in the midst of a journey of DJing, and sort of, I guess,
Hmm.
tell your story, get a lot of advice from you. I've known you for a while, and I know you've really inspired me and my DJing. I was doing club nights for a while before I met you, and I think I thought I was a really good DJ. And then when I booked you, I realised there's like other levels to what's going on. And as I've booked you over the years, I think you really helped sort of improve and inform what I was doing. And you were involved with the clubs that we were doing, which by default helped lots of the artists on Tru Thoughts. So,
Mm.
I mean, I rate you as a DJ. So, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, well, it's really nice because we have that history, and I think this is something which is important when you're starting out is to establish some strong connections that you maintain. And this doesn't mean like keeping in touch with people every week, but there are so many people who move through life and then maybe do music for 10 years and then maybe drop out because of family things or other commitments and then get back into it. But there's still that network of people. I use Charlie Dark as an example because like we used to speak a lot in the 90s and DJ together and move in the same circles. And then he stepped out to do a few of his other things and establish Rundem. And the last few years he's got back into DJing. He's still got that authority and enthusiasm and encyclopedic knowledge of music, and still we can tell he's excited by how he felt when this music might have come out 30 or 40 years ago. And I think it's something interesting to DJs from our generation is that kind of things have cycled through quite a lot now in terms of, I don't know, broken beat coming back, or things that we got into might have been the second or third cycle of something that perhaps our parents' generation or their parents' generation might have seen. So I think once you've been around the wheel a few times, it's I think in terms of what you consider important for kind of longevity, and also I think just enjoying what you do, I think these things start to become clearer over the years.
yeah. And it's a big thing, isn't it? And I guess, I mean, one of the things I sort of feel that we do, and what a lot of people that we know in respect to, I guess, from a DJ point of view, we're quite into certain music, not necessarily a specific genre at a time, but what we enjoy about DJing is maybe pushing sounds or pushing different things that we're genuinely into. I guess it's not that jobbing DJ that we're just going to play whatever everyone wants, and that can, I guess, that's quite a juggling act, trying to get that working and getting I guess, a longer term career, but also those gigs. Because I mean, I saw a thread recently with people doing all their worst gigs, and it was those, booking in a bar and then the owners telling them what to play. And I guess you and me, we both managed to avoid doing those type of gigs, and and I guess that's maybe a way to. One of the questions I was going to ask. I know when people ask me about what's important, what's a good way to start
Mhm.
DJing, I always say just start your own night. Before Tru Thoughts, I used to do my own nights, and I wasn't a
Mhm.
well-known name, but did it locally, and was just about, can I just get a small amount of people to come and DJ? I know you do your own night, and I think you did that little into releasing music. Is that right? Was that the first night you
Um,
did Keep It Unreal?
yeah, it was around. I mean, my Keep It Unreal night is that started in '99 as a launch party for the album of the same name. Up until then, I've been a guest DJ at lots of nights around Manchester. I was sort of because I think we both come from situations where there's a general appreciation of music, but you're like, I'll go to this reggae night, I'll go to this house music night, I'll go to this African music night, I'll go to this street soul night or whatever. So there's a kind of an appreciation and an investigation of all the specialist scenes and kind of what makes them tick, because all these scenes are generally led by DJs in terms of either old music being recontextualized by collectors, Northern Soul being a prime example, or the reggae DJing scene where I suppose initially it started out in the 50s as people buying, getting rare records sent over from New Orleans and then making their own for the purpose of being victorious in the DJ situation. But they're all like, I think you end up sort of cherry picking different experiences and approaches from different genres and communities, because, and especially in the UK, there's so much crossover between those. And every time you examine hip hop, and you go, okay, well, this is in and of itself, it's a style of music, but in terms of the dance, the production, the whole approach, this comes from a myriad of different places. So I think it's kind of, I think once you get stuck into that, and this is kind of going back to the idea of doing different nights, for me, I think doing your own night's really important, or just joining together with like-minded people. Because I was never really that proactive in doing my own nights. I would be employed by bars, or I'd play regularly. I'd have residencies at other people's nights. Um, because it was such a kind of, I think in the 90s, we were very fortunate because there was a real, there were scenes that were really based upon the appreciation of a lot of Black American music and using the styles of presentation, like hip hop and house and all that kind of thing, and soul music. But there was also, by that point, a really strong homegrown scene. And I think also by the early 90s, a lot of the equipment, both DJing and producing equipment, was relatively affordable, or a lot more affordable than it was in the 80s, in terms of, you can have a home studio, and you could get some cheap belt drive decks or some mobile DJ kit and just get stuck in, with a large amount of gaffer tape and inventiveness. But I think, I mean, you were talking about these bad gigs, like, playing in a bar and the owner telling you what to play. I've had tons of those gigs. I did 3 or 4 years of bar gigs in Manchester. I went from being a bedroom DJ. I started DJing in '84 in my bedroom. I wasn't that ambitious about getting gigs. I got offered gigs, and then the moment I started getting gigs, I got more and more and more. And I really enjoyed every single one, whether it was a world music club night, whether it was a hip hop night, whether it was just a Wednesday night in a bar for 20 quid. And I've had these gigs, but I think you need to be able to deal with them. I think kind of difficult owners, staff kind of interfering in stuff, technical nightmares, the rude customers, because a lot of the time, I think, if you're unable to deal with these and you haven't had years and years of experience, it's like being, working in security or something. You have to be able to deal with people tactfully, because no matter how in the wrong or obnoxious someone is being, everybody thinks they're right in that situation. You know what I mean? So I think it's being able to diffuse something, and I suppose, deal with technical issues in the middle of the night. Oh, the mixer's broken, or the turntable's coming out of only one side, or or the records keep jumping. It's like, okay, well, what do we do about this now? That's one half of your brain. And then what do we do before the next gig to make sure this doesn't happen again? You know what I mean? And for me, I think, promotion aside, vibes aside, music aside, community aside, I think being technically proficient in terms of your approach as a DJ, and spending time with the people whose venues you're playing in, just to kind of work through what you want to achieve, what their limitations are, perhaps how you can work together to solve a particular problem, or to even make sure a certain problem doesn't happen. This is, with stuff like jumping records, feedback, especially vinyl. You're opening a can of worms to a whole load of possibilities of things going wrong, which just means you just need a little mental checklist of, like a little, right, well, I'm going to bring some things, I'm going to bring some spares, and I'm also going to make sure I get down to the venue early, which I think is great for peace of mind. But I think it's also great for building a rapport and a relationship with the people from the venue or the promoter, because you're like, yeah, I care about this,
It's really brilliant advice there, and I remember from booking you about. I mean, I always get down there early at a venue, but I remember you were one of the first DJs that I booked, and I had a were booking quite a few people in the 90s, but you were one of the first people that I booked. That you came down early down to Brighton, and you called up and said, "Oh, can we meet up and hang out?" And I'd never really had that. I was quite used to people. They might come an hour before their set time and all of that, but we were hanging around, and we got on quite well. And then you used to do that every time, and that was I thought that was a really it was a great learning curve for me when I started DJing out, and when the artists were DJing out, I'd always advise them, look, go early, chat with the promoter, because they're probably going to be a fan. They'll tell you what goes on in that area. It was, I mean, I saw you do that quite naturally. And obviously with promoters or DJs, you're into music, so you can have a good chat, catch up, find out about tunes and things like that. So
yeah, well, it was also great that when you lived in a flat opposite a record shop, we could hang out and drink tea, and then then spend 2-3 hours digging. But it was like, for me, it's especially when I started out, the fact that I got to travel from Manchester to Brighton regularly. And hang out with people who were just as enthusiastic as me about music. And this wasn't just, you and the Tru Thoughts guys. This was then going to, meeting people like Johnny Reggae and other people in record shops and, Pure Pleasure and all the little shops in Brighton. And you start to get a sense of community and local music taste and, local DJs and producers and that kind of thing. So then when you're playing there, you have a real connection because you're like, right, I've kind of immersed myself a little bit in the local scene, just on a very personal level, kind of half making friends and finding common ground, and half just kind of, I want some records. I want, you're hungry for music and knowledge and the whole, you're trying to put this whole picture together. And I think the moment you start traveling outside of your own city, and I think it's a beautiful thing to be established in your own city as well, that normally takes a few years, but I think once you kind of learn how to do it in your own town in terms of people skills, technical skills, musical skills, getting the word out, doing your thing in a way that satisfies yourself and other people. And then the moment you start to play out of town, you take a little bit of that with you, because you're kind of like, you're dragging yourself away from not your comfort zone, but it's like, everyone in the venue, and it's like, well, I need to kind of, I feel I need to kind of establish these relationships with people in other places so I can feel that same sense of security and kind of like foundation when you play somewhere, so then you can play there with kind of respect, authority, confidence, and be, you have all the technical side down. It's like a sound check, so now we're going to have some fun together tonight, you know what I mean, rather than, oh, I'm going to play it safe and here's my set list because I'm a bit nervous, so it's sort of like, it's been mega prepared, but it's also going, this is an amazing opportunity, and just taking the time to do it. And I see one of the things that young, quite successful DJs, and I think obviously the speed at which people can go from being in a bedroom to being on a festival stage quite high in the lineup is quite quick. And I think one thing, aside from the learning thing of being yelled at by rude pub owners who want you to play Beyonce now, or whatever, is that aside from going through the mill of doing really bad gigs, which are really character building, I think you also lose out on a little bit of that, the slow, just getting to know people as you as your world expands into traveling around to all these different places. And you see so many people now doing 6 gigs a weekend, and it's like, yeah, this is amazing experience, but I think the important thing that will get left behind is the connection with the people who are actually asking you to come out there, and the connection with their crews and their communities in terms of what they're trying to achieve by getting you to play at their event.
I mean, I mean, one of the good points I really believe there is, don't underestimate being a local DJ and doing well in your local area and doing that, and then trying to go up from there. And I think that's something I can see in hindsight was really beneficial for me, and especially when the label started, when sort of Quantic, but I mean, they were almost the first time they were DJing at our club, and they were establishing themselves at a local level as DJs, and I thought that worked really. That helped them find their feet a bit. So when they really started getting out and getting those bookings, they had that good local experience, which when you've got a crowd on your side, it gives you a bit of confidence, but also, yeah, you want to challenge yourself, not play, like you said, don't play the same sets wherever you go. I remember, I don't know if you remember, like for me, really clearly, I remember booking you the first time because I was playing Chicken in a Box at my night then, which was Shaky Wig, and it was a huge anthem. And I remember seeing a chart of yours, like pre-internet. You weren't really seeing what, wasn't easily accessible. So then I saw, there was a chart of yours in Music Magazine, and it had, I think there was 10 songs, and I think I knew 8 of them. There were a couple I didn't know. And one was this R&B tune, Earth Girls. I remember going to London to Black Market Records and buying it, and it was really good. I thought, okay, and you're even in that top 10, it was quite eclectic, the playlist, similar to what I was doing. And then I don't know, I think I called up the record label number and called you. But when you came for the first time you played, to be fair, the night wasn't that busy, but you did like an unbelievable set and nobody left. And I remember afterwards people going, oh, what was he like? So I was like, I just said, he's unbelievably brilliant as a DJ, like all across the board, and no one left. And I think that was that thing. It was, it wasn't maybe the greatest club set for you, but for me, it was a real reminder of that. I just rock it. That's what you did. You came down, and I was a bit apologetic. Look, it's not as busy as it normally is, but yeah.
But I suppose like there's a couple of points to touch on there. I mean, one, I remember that was on Ship Street, wasn't it? That little basement. Yeah. But that was also for me a bit of a pilgrimage because that's where Russ Dewberry did his jazz rooms.
Yeah.
So that was like, that must have held like 50, 60 people. And even if there'd been like 20, 30 people on that night, it was just like, I have very vivid memories. My friend Barney was down there. He was basically the guy, Michael Barnes Winters. He's originally from Bristol, lived in Manchester, but he was the guy who got me my first gigs in Manchester, got me my first record deal. And I think we actually came down on the train from Manchester together. It was a direct train. It was 6 hours, like a little local train. And I remember that. And he came down to the gig, and that was like that whole, I think just the joy of like, wow, I'm coming a couple of 100 miles to play records in this legendary place for someone who's excited about it as I am, And I think that's it. I think, even if you're in a massive venue and there's 100 people there, it's like, you can look at it two ways. You can go, oh, wow, we've not sold that many tickets and, and stress about it, or go, these people have really made an effort, you know what I mean? And you get the same thing where, if you're playing at a festival and it's raining, it's like, well, these people have come out in the rain, am I going to moan that it's not busy enough, or am I just going to go, right, let's psychologically clear any thoughts I have about a full dance floor and let's work, and you have to push and you have to, but the good thing about when you're playing to like a sparse dance floor is you are much more connected with everybody there because you're people watching, partly out of fear that people are going to leave, and also partly out of like, you get to see the friend groups, or maybe, oh, wow, those people are really responding well to that tune, better than I thought, you know what I mean? So actually they're going to lead the musical journey for the next 15 minutes because they took that baton and ran with it, you know what I mean? And before I kind of get too, too off at an angle, I think the good thing about local DJs, I think, aside from it really building a foundation in terms of you just having a voice and a focus, and it really enables you to be yourself because you are growing in amongst a kind of consistent community of people, and therefore you're able to make mistakes in a fairly low pressure environment. You're also able to develop your style, and your style is often developed in resistance to restrictions or to me, style's how you deal with problems a lot of the time, or restrictions in technology or whatever might frustrate you. It's how you get over that, which actually gives you, for me, is the biggest element of anybody's style. And that kind of what comes out, because it's a determination, it's a focus, and that's kind of like the sort of direct communication between an artist and their audience or their collaborators. But aside from it, I think it's sort of building up your chops and skills and just kind of overall don't know, solidity as an artist for when you're traveling. I think from me as a DJ who often visits other cities and there's a support DJ or a promoter who's putting on a really good night regularly, if you step into that as a guest, it's such a different experience. If you're like, you're welcomed by an existing community. It's like you're not having to start from scratch on the night. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah,
wow, there's this whole really varied, eclectic crew here, and they've already got a vibe going. That's, it's like it's you're playing at someone else's night, and they've been doing a similar thing to what we've all been doing separately in our
yeah,
own little bubbles. You know what I mean? And I think that the fact that, if you allow a little more time when you are lucky enough to travel around the world and play gigs, it's like immerse yourself in that a little bit, because it kind of keeps you in touch with your own scene back home in terms of what people are doing week in, week out. And often, I've had this a few times where I've played, in amazing places all over the world, and a local resident who I might have known for 20 years is playing to a full club who aren't dancing. And then the moment I step on stage, people start moving, and it's like, I've not played anything yet. So there's something, to me, that's a deep, that's kind of disrespectful to their own people who are actually partly the reason why there's a decent thriving scene in that city. I mean, Melbourne's an example of that. I've had that before where a DJ friend of mine was playing before me. And I got on the mic and was like, look, I'm not playing until you dance to this guy.
wow,
Kano, who's the same age as me, he's as good a DJ as I am. He's an amazing producer. He's a proper, he's all over the place.
yeah,
Why are you stood with your arms crossed, waiting for me to come on? Because I'm
wow,
not playing any better. You know what I mean? But it's just like, but these are sometimes, I think there's
yeah,
there's a bit of a
yeah, yeah,
headliner culture going on, and it's like, well, in a healthy scene, that shouldn't
yeah.
really be an issue. Um, and I
And it
think that,
should be.
yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry,
it
carry
should
on.
be. It should be about the night. I guess that maybe leads into one of the things. I mean, I've, I've never really experienced that. With all the nights that we did, the people, they were dancing early on. But I guess one of the bits of advice that I always talk to people about is learning to warm up. I always feel that the art of warming up is maybe one of the
Yeah,
skills that, like, it's relatively easy in inverted commas to rock a busy dance floor that's up for it. But I think that building up the skill of learning how to warm up a crowd as it's beginning, and just that bit where it's quiet and then the people are beginning to dance, but you don't want to get too hectic.
yeah,
I always feel that from me having a residency, that's one of the best things that I learn. And then we could teach when we started the label and the artists were coming in. I'd often get them, even if they were, at points Bonobo was bigger than me in Quantic, and I'd say, look, just do the warm up and see what it's like, and do that thing just to get a little bit of experience of that. You can just play what you want, but experiment and push a little bit. And I'm a firm
yeah.
believer. I don't know what you feel about that side of things.
I think it's brilliant, and I think, like, I think most DJs, they have this thing of, they might do their own nights, but also there's a little bit of, wow, I've left my full time job, I'm going to do a few bar gigs, and I think that the bar gig thing is very much, I think it's really important to get experience of playing all night, and I think when you're playing all night, the warm up doesn't seem like a waste of time, because over repeated nights, you're like, I can actually set the scene for whatever story I want to tell later. And I think the more considered you are early on, the more you have to, there's less need to kind of musically bite your tongue later, if you see what I mean. You can go absolutely anywhere. And I think there's a real magic and a kind of theatre to the way you play when people come into a room. And same again, you're not just stepping on stage and there's a few hundred people there cheering, and you're like, where do we go from here? Or I have to make a strong entrance. But there isn't really a connection there. You know what I mean? It's almost like you have to rely on previous experience in order to be able to start kind of on the good foot and then work out where you're going past there. Depending on how long you got to play as well, which is another consideration. But I think when you're playing from the doors, because you're playing to no one at the start, people, you can kind of welcome each individual person with their own tune, you know what I mean, and see how you can watch how people come in? Are they going to stand around the wall? Some people come straight on the dance floor, and you're like, okay, we've got a lively group here. Let's, I was going to hold back a bit, but you stepped on the dance floor. So it's a bit more like it's almost like a dance between the crowd and the DJ, which is more noticeable because the dance floor is less populated. And that's the same as I was mentioning before. You have to be. I think when there's less people in the club, you end up being really observant about everybody's behaviour. But I think what I like about the early thing is you can kind of sometimes deliberately hold back from anything that's danceable. And sometimes people will still try and move to that. You know what I mean? It's like okay, yeah, good on you. But I think that thing of stepping up through the night and go, right, we're going to set the scene with something really warm and welcoming. It's like, come in. Obviously the lighting is very important. The volume at which you play. I think you need to keep it low so people come towards you. I think if you play too loud, first of all, you're killing people's hearing, and it pushes people away, because in an empty room, there's so many more reflections, and the sound is a lot more cluttered and harsh. And if you play, you can keep the sub nice and loud, maybe have the really tickly tops. We call it a smile on the EQ. So basically, you restrain your mids, you can boost the bottom end, you boost the tops, and then it's physically satisfying, but people can still talk to each other. And this is a really important point about warming up, as well as the music you play. It's like, watch people when they talk to each other, because people aren't dancing at the start, but they're conversing with each other. If they can't hear if people are like that in each other's ears, the music's too loud. And I think, like, initially, just give people half an hour just to kind of loosen up, put their coats in, grab a pint, wait for their mates to come in. Then once they've kind of shaken off the outside world, which will take them a few minutes, put their phones away, all that, then they'll start to lock into what you're doing. So initially, it's almost like a little holding pattern where you're like, okay, yeah, I can wait for you. Right, okay, I can see you nodding a bit there. Let's up a little notch. And then, but you can play music that's quite sneaky, a bit saucy, you know what I mean? Sometimes like quite hypnotic, repetitive. Like maybe, a lot of, say, really slow 4/4 music's good for that. Like 90 BPM kind of, chug or whatever people call it these days, or things like I don't know, Bill Withers, You've Got the Stuff and stuff like that. These are quite kind of like almost ploddy in their own way, but they're quite bass heavy, almost like spongy in their way. They're kind of mellow, but they're quite insistent, often because of the repetitive nature of the tune and the length. So it gets people into a bit of a zone without you having to do too much.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. Like, volume is a real thing that a lot of people just think you've just got to pump it up, isn't it? And I think, I mean, I've obviously seen loads of long sets of yours over the years, and I love how you are quite restrained. And even, I mean, I remember, I guess. I mean, we were booking you for a while, but there was a point where you became really big and you did longer sets, and it used to be busy really early, but you were still really patient. You were still low on the volume. You weren't, it's like, let's just get, too crazy early on. And it just really built that nice atmosphere up. And I love that patience. And I think that was a really brilliant, because I mean, I guess as a DJ like you could do a, banging 4-hour set if you wanted to at that point, but you were still, I remember you would drop some, maybe jazz or those awkward tunes that are good to listen to but aren't necessary. But I think it opens people's ears, doesn't it? To look, I'm going to throw a little curveball here early, but there will be, a tune that later on as well. And that confidence, I guess, is something I've always seen with you about DJing. I mean, one of the things I was going to ask with you, I mean, were you, you said you were I guess part of other nights and more collectives and bookings. Were you always quite confident about just playing the music that you wanted to play, like almost ready to be fired if you just really believed in the music and you wanted to try and get people to, or?
No, I think it's about finding a way to share the music that's important to you. I think, I was never, and I really admire, there's two DJs who are so thick-skinned, like people who just drop a tune and they don't care. Yeah. Well, there's three DJs like that. One's Andy Votel, another's Chubby Grooves, another is Ade, from Plastic People. These are people I've played with a lot of very different to me. They're quite confrontational in their style. I'm not, but I'm kind of sneaky, and like I'll play a few house tunes and then you'll be dancing to it, but it'll be jazz, and you're not sure how you got there. So I use kind of sleight of hand a lot of the time. Because I've always been, what got me into DJing was the influence of people like Coldcut and Double D and Steinsky in terms of how they, often with an edge of humor, combined often quite disparate things together in a way which either made you smile or got somewhere without you realizing, you know what I mean? Because it's like a lot of these, I think of records as kind of tactical pieces in a game of chess, you know what I mean, or words in a sentence. So it's not, and I like the way that I like to make music sneak up on people and build something up. And this is why I'm very subtle at the start. But I think the volume thing's really important because, like, there'll be a certain point in a certain tune, and every single venue will have a point where it's like you cannot go any louder than this. Now, if you're constantly pushing against that, you're going to be giving people ear fatigue. It's going to be harsh, and also because the human ear will start to kind of close and compress if you present it with too much high frequencies over the evening. Even if your level is like that constantly, you're to the crowd, it will appear to be going down because your ear will just, you'll know that if you're in a really loud room and you walk out for 10 minutes and then go back in, it will seem twice as loud as it was because your ears are basically going, what are you doing to me? I'm going to protect myself, So it's like you try and offset some of that. I mean, the last couple of hours when it's full volume, I think you'll always reach that point of like, it gets a little bit on the edge, and sometimes you need that edge to get the energy in the room. With certain tunes you have to make sound quite uncomfortable, perhaps pushing some of the high mids just to get it a little bit of like, that the same way you might do that with bottom end with a really gnarly bass line. You might be like, no, that tambourine needs to like make me pull a face, but that's the element in the tune which needs highlighting. But going back to the early thing, if that's your limit, you want to work up like that slowly, through the night. And sometimes it's like the music will creep up and then it'll plateau for a bit and it might go down and then back up. And even within a tune, especially if you're in a festival or something like that where you have dB limits, not only, you might have issues with neighbors or something, so you're like, I want this night to be satisfying, but in order for it to seem really loud at certain points, I'm going to have it a little too quiet at other points because it's never actually going to be at the volume I want it to be. So it's like, I don't know, for instance, a really obvious example, Don't Leave Me This Way by Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes. It's a 10-minute, 12-minute tune, depending on which version. People know that tune. So the intro can be really, 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 really quiet and people start singing it. And then you turn up a bit for the chorus, but don't put the bass in and turn the volume down a bit. And then when the chorus comes in, you've got, your faders should be up there, it's there, and your bass is off. And then you're like, oh, baby. And you can just put the bass in and turn the volume up. And suddenly everyone's gone from bang. I nearly fell off my chair then. But it's like, you are underlining and highlighting certain parts within a song. And obviously this is much more of common practice now that people are more, rotary mixers are more available and people are more familiar with isolators and the whole kind of drama of the New York style of DJing in Chicago, you know what I mean? But it's like these, especially when you're playing quite linear music, having these tools at your disposal to kind of work a record, very subtly sometimes. You don't have to be like bass completely out and mid up and the highs off. Sometimes you're just like, I'm just going to turn the bass down a tiny bit, and pull the fader level down a tiny bit, and then when I want to bump it up, that's going to have, you might be turning it up 2 or 3 dB, which is effectively doubling the volume. You know what I mean? So it's like it's using like technical means to emphasize elements within a tune, especially if you're like, right, this chorus is when we're going to step up the night, and that's at this in this split second, that is when the whole dance floor is going to get locked in, and you can predict that or increase the fact of it happening and make it more of an event. If you just push the volume a bit, you can pull the volume back a bit, because often, and live engineers do this a lot, and this is why it's really important, I think, to speak to the technical staff in venues, because like they'll have so much experience of dealing with like, well, we are boxed in terms of our availability of sound levels and what our system can cope with and what we're allowed to play because of dB limits. And a lot of live engineers will have the first tune full volume, or they might go up, right, we're full volume, and then over the course of the tune, I'm going to pull it down 3 decibels, and then the next one's going to go up. So you're always like, it's down and up.
Yeah,
So it's almost like, dance music has so many drops in it. So all you're doing is extending the concept of a drop and maybe superimposing that on older music that doesn't perhaps rely as much on that kind of on-off formula, but you're still working with it. And also because for a younger crowd, that's a really familiar dynamic, bass on, hey, bass off, when's the bass on, but it's exciting because obviously, as humans, we are wired to respond in quite an extreme way to very low frequencies, back when, low frequencies might have meant a thunderstorm or a lion's roar.
Yeah. So look, I mean, it's brilliant, and I've seen you behind the scenes, really sorting out the sound and picking up on that. Just to get back a little bit to, I mean, programming is one of the things I think you're really amazing at. I remember, so we started booking you for a little while, and at the time we were booking you. I think for a couple of years, and then the sort of drum and bass jungle thing was really picking up. And I remember booking you to come down, and I was trying to play it at the night that I was doing, and people were walking, like half the people were staying, half the people walking out, and I couldn't quite figure out how to program it in the set. And I remember when you came down, I said, "Oh, you're playing drum and bass?" And you said, "Yeah." And then I was fascinated to watch like what you can do. And then on the night, I remember you played a little reggae set, which reggae used to go down, and you played Reggie Stepper drum pan sound, and then I think you played Ronnie Size Days or a tune on V Records and mixed that in, and then everybody really cheered, and it was the first time you figured out a way. And I think that's something I've always seen with you DJing. I've seen you at the Concord, and again, I think you were maybe playing a bit of house, or not totally bang it. And it was quite peak time. And then you put Pharoah Saunders, You Gotta Have Freedom on, and the whole crowd, 600, 700 people just cheer. Like you see those clips of those piano rave things in the 90s. It was like that. It was like, I mean, that's such a memory that I've got of where you played a proper jazz record, but at peak time, and everybody just really related to it. And like with programming, are you practicing at home a lot, ideas, or are you freestyling as your DJ?
No, it's I don't think it's something to practice. I used to a lot, so because before I had gigs, it was just like, well, let's just do mixtapes or whatever. But for me, it's all feeling, it's all watching the people, and it's also going, what do I want to achieve? What do I want to play this evening? And quite often, I'm not planning ahead, but I'm thinking, okay, like for me, playing all night, I often divide the night into different sections. And the first hours, like, right, well, we need to set the mood. We need to just have it when people walk in, just them go, this is nice, and it's like a warmth. It's like almost like an embrace. You know what I mean? The music's quiet, the venue's dark, the music's of a decent volume, but it's not overpowering. It's just right for the room. And I walk around a lot early on to make sure it's not too loud, and I people watch to check that people aren't shouting at each other. If they're shouting, it's too loud. And it's just, you walk around early on, you put a long tune on, you go and you try and get in tune with how you feel on that dance floor and in that building and on that night with those people. Feel the atmosphere you're creating. You can wander around and talk to a few people. And then you actually start to connect with what's on the dance floor, because this is another thing of especially, say, the Concord. You've got to meet a high stage and a barrier, but you're trying to be at one with 600 people who are physically being kept apart from you, and you're quite a lot higher than them. So there's a lot of I don't know. There's so many different elements, but in terms of the programming, it's like you have your first bit where you set the scene, and half of that is just like, right, I've started now. I just need to like drop my shoulders a bit, deep breath, and then you can slowly kind of like, uh, yeah, I like quite sort of, yeah, music with quite a steady momentum, like yeah, so like Slow 4/4 or DJ Crush or Joey Chavez or these kind of like quite sort of meaty grooves, which sort of like sort of quite mechanical but also quite rootsy and bass heavy. In like reggae is great early on because because there's a lot of space in the music, you can play it quite loud without it being overbearing. So it's really tuning into the sonic characteristics of the music, how that will fit with the acoustics of the room, with the characteristics of the sound system. Um, and it's just like using ingredients. It's just like, well, this is what I've got in my cupboard. These are the guests I have here. Well, I've run out of that. Let's do this instead. But you're a bit like, oh, we've run out of pans, right? Well, let me just I can put all that in together. So you're thinking on your feet all the time, but from the perspective of like I've sound checked, my records are all in order. I've had a nice meal. You know, everything's sorted. I've got spare turntables there. Blah blah blah. But so then you're for the next 5 hours, you're just like, right, where are we going to go now? And that little thing of not quite knowing what I'm doing, but being in the situation where you're on stage. People have paid to come in. You're in it. That pressure alongside being mega organized with how you keep your records. I write BPM on all my records and notes about the key or how the intro goes, how the ending goes, because you might like in the spur of the moment go, right, what would that sound like over that? Well, I can see from my notes on that record, there's an 8-bar drum outro on that. And there's an 11-bar drum outro on the other one, so I'm gonna have to start that one 3 beats in, otherwise it's going to sound a bit rubbish. You know what I mean? Or yeah, it's just making notes about the structure of the records, because sometimes tactically as well, the records can take you from A to B in a way that would take you ages with more linear music. I've got soul records that go from 95 to 130 BPM in 2 minutes. You could do that mixing, but it'd take you 3 hours. You know what I mean? So it's just like it's weird. It's a real marriage of the technical and like the kind of emotional. And I think once your technical side's down completely, in terms of your technical skills, the DJ, in the sound system, you've been really comfortable with the place, and you're like, right, well, the next 5 hours is exploration and connection. So first hour, establish, set the scene. Second hour, people are going to start to move a bit. You ease the volume up at a point that's appropriate, because you keep wanting these little, can I just nudge that a little bit? You know what I mean? Sometimes you want people to notice you're turning it up, other times you don't. The lighting can change maybe slightly as well, so you're liaising with the lighting engineer. Oh, a bit more smoke, please, or all that kind of thing. And then you might pop out on the dance floor a few more times, because early doors, you can kind of shuffle around a bit just to feel connected. And how does that sound now? It's a bit loud. I could turn it up a bit there, or let me just check the vibe on the dance floor and say hello to a few people. So you're almost like acquainting yourself with the people in the venue, and you're like, wow, I'm going to play these really spacey things. And then I suppose as the night kind of comes together, all these little strands are kind of woven together into whatever focus you feel like applying to that night. And then once people start dancing, you're off, because then there's no turning back. You know what I mean? But then same again, you're increasing in the intensity, and you're thinking about tempo, you're thinking about volume, you're thinking about EQ balance, you're also thinking about the elements in the music. So, for instance, it's like you can deprive people of certain elements for a short period of time, so that when you then, you fill that void with some, you might play just instrumentals for 15 minutes. You might play music without drums for 15 minutes, but music that's quite propulsive in its own way. So any tune you drop after that that has drums is going to get a good reaction. But that could be a really weird left field tune that you'll be scared to play at peak time in amongst maybe more danceable and accessible records. So it's like you can, yeah, I'll play drums for 15 minutes and then play an a cappella and then play a full tune, but it's like all these tunes are quite captivating in their own way. And it's like, right, right now, that drum tune, or even something classic like, Soul to Soul, Back to Life a cappella. You play that, and then when the beat comes in, and after that, you can go pretty much anywhere, you know what I mean? And it's just like, these are breathers.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can play a big tune which doesn't tick any of the boxes in terms of club sonics.
Yeah.
But it's just like, well, this is the classic, so volume doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much bass there is, but the tune after is going to properly So it's sort of like you can go from gentle and swaying to really quite aggressive to funky to kind of slinky. So it's every tune has its own little personality, and you're trying to you're trying to sort of move, sort of hold a groove for 15 minutes and then move somewhere else, either really subtly so that people don't notice, or you're trying to do it quite dynamically. So you're like, oh, wow, we're over here now, you know what I mean? Or sneakily like, right, well, you don't really like drum and bass, but I'm going to mix drum and bass over reggae. And then you'll like drum and bass, you know what I mean? So there's that as well. There's a kind of like that whole thing of subliminally just putting something in underneath.
Yeah.
It's going, right, I know your reference points and I want to go over here, but I'm going to hold your hand a bit, you know what I mean? We're going to come over here together, and this is going to make perfect sense.
Yeah.
But if I just drop that tune, you know what I mean? So but then that is driven by a need to go, I need to play this tune tonight.
Yeah.
I need to play this weird left field wonky jazz tune that makes me go crazy, but I need to be careful about how I play it. But that's programming. And I know you have another question.
No, that's all right. No, go for it.
But this is like in DJ magazine, which was like used to be called Jocks, which used to be like a mobile DJ industry magazine. There was an article, a very small article, like a paragraph about programming. I think it might have been Les Adams who wrote it or something. And this was like, what is programming? And I think basically they said, right, well, we're going to go from programming is basically you slowly change the music so that every time a record comes on, 10% of the people leave the dance floor, 10% come on. So they were saying they use Rick Astley and Public Enemy.
I remember that article. That's I read that and thought,
here is how you get from Rick Astley to Public Enemy in 5 tunes, without losing the dance floor. And they basically broke it down. They basically, I don't know whether they went Rick Astley and then something else, and then I don't know, CNC Music Factory, and then
it's all in hip house, I think, didn't it? And then to hip hop, I think.
And so, but it was just like that was a little throwaway article, but I think it really illustrated in very, very accessible terms what the art of programming is, and it's basically you are going between two, on the surface, very different styles of music or tunes in a way which will either replenish the dance floor, a kind of manageable rate so it stays consistently full, or so that you're getting people into stuff without them realizing, you know what I mean? So it's very subtle, but in a short period of time you can actually be quite you can go, how did you get from that to that, and you were talking about the sort of right at the start of our conversation, you were mentioning like the whole, the kind of DJing, which is kind of our thing rather than that kind of party DJing or playing in bars. But I don't see them as being that different. I think the skill of programming that a wedding DJ has sometimes far exceeds the programming capability of the most left field jazz DJ, you know what I mean? Because they're like, when you're playing kind of in our scene, you sort of know your crowd. Wedding DJs don't. And I know it's all tunes that everybody knows, but it's like, how did you, you've got the 4-year-olds and the 80-year-olds all dancing together. that's an art form.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think like too often it's easy. I think it's easy to kind of separate different strands of what we might see as kind of cool versus cheesy or whatever. And it's like actually the skill set,
Yeah.
um,
And
is very similar.
I got asked to DJ at my son's disco, and I said I'm not going to be able to do it. And the other dad, I said he's much better than me, and he's really good, and he does shout outs, and he does everything. And I was watching it. He did one when the lockdown happened, and I was like, wow, that is so good. And I was watching him just keep everybody happy, do the shout outs, and it went all different, like crazy amount of different types of music. So yeah, I definitely
Yeah.
agree. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I've done school discos, but I've done it with my daughter, so she's picking the tunes, you know what I mean, and she's doing the shout outs, and it was like, yeah, because you can't, it's difficult to find common ground with, a load of 10-year-olds or whatever, but it's, yeah, you definitely need a junior assistant for that. But yeah, that, like looking at people, say like Mikey Don, he's the same age as me. I remember going to see one of the first club gigs I went to see was when he was DJing in 1991 in a club in Manchester. But it was like, he's just on the mic all the time, giving shouts to people as they come in, and kind of bullying people into dancing. You know what I mean? It's just like non-stop on the mic, juggling tunes. It's like, wow, this is like I could not do that. Because that is like I can get my head completely into the technical thing, and I can liaise with MCs and vocalists and all that kind of thing. But in terms of like being in that zone and also being the life and soul of the party, that's a kind of difficult thing. But you and I are quite quiet people, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So it's sort of like in terms of we're not going to be doing all that on stage, and I mean, I do a bit of that nowadays, but it's kind of like, oh, this feels a bit weird. Whereas other people are like, yeah, I'll just take my top off and wave it around my head and get everyone going. You know what I mean?
I mean, for me, I mean, I saw you at the Concord recently. You were doing your night there, and I played just before you. That's it there. And I mean, to me, when I came back, it just reminded me. It's like I almost feel like you haven't changed since that time that I first booked you. You're still you were still playing tunes hadn't heard of. You played tunes I'd heard of, and you play them in a way that was like, that sounds amazing. You play tunes I'd forgotten about. But I think with what you were saying earlier about I think some people may listen to this and think, oh, because you're Mr Scruff, you can get away with playing that. But I know from watching you, and I think that was one of the best things that I saw from watching you over the years, is you were I mean, I try to be brave all the time with playing music, and you'd sometimes get a bit panicky, and you'd fade out a tune or anything like that. And I think what I saw with you is I always felt you were quite confident if you were playing a tune, and even if it wasn't necessarily going down super well, you'd be like, I know Will Quantick was like it's like that when he DJs. You're going to play this record, you're not worried too much about look. No one's, the whole club isn't going to leave after 6 minutes. I'm just going to go through the motions of this and then, figure out the tune to play after. And I've always liked that about you. And that braveness, I think, is something not to take for granted. And you can't push it too much, I feel. I guess I'm like you. I'm not one of those that just wants to push everybody to the edge. And, I love this tune, so you might. I'm like you. I try and I'm thinking of a plan to how am I going to play this tonight, and where can I try and fit it in? So yeah, but yeah.
Yeah, it's. But I think also like sometimes you might drop a tune, and it might take 3 or 4 minutes to get going. Because if you put an album on at home, and say it's a 7-minute soul tune or a jazz tune or a disco tune, and by the end of it you're like, oh yeah, oh I've got to play this, but you kind of forget because you're not really paying attention that the first 5 minutes might be a bit dull. So if you're like playing it in a club and then by 4 minutes people are a bit like, but you've not given, and there's loads of disco tunes that don't get good until 5 minutes, but you kind of need sometimes a bit of a bland bit to set it up because you're depriving people of that thing that they want as well, you know what I mean? So it's sometimes letting records just make it flat for a bit, and most of the time that's unintentional. It's like, now see it through to the end, because I remember when I heard this for the first time, the last 2 minutes were amazing, you know what I mean? And I just thought that tune's amazing, but you forget the dull bit at the start. But then that obviously gives you time for, okay, well, how do I get out of this without it seeming like I've just, I'm reversing out back onto the road and going back where I was. It's like, well, we've turned off. I need to kind of style this out a bit. You know what I mean? So
And
it's,
also those tunes can work really well, aren't they? Because
yeah,
sometimes when they make sense at the end, then I think also the audience really begins to trust you because they're like,
yeah,
that was a good journey. I judged it at 5, but at 8 minutes, I'm into this now, and that it all
yeah,
makes
yeah.
sense, isn't it? So yeah.
Yeah, and I think there are certain tunes. I think half the time that happens unintentionally, simply because it's just uh, maybe your connection with that tune is different to the reality, um, and sometimes it is. Yeah, this tune's amazing at the end, and certain tunes are great where they just switch halfway through. I mean, think about Eddie Grant, California Style, and that's like a kind of borderline, really sugary kind of soca tune, um, which is cool. You know what I mean? Because it's like, especially around carnival season, a bit of that's great anyway. But at the end of it, it just sounds like a wonky sort of house tune from 1986, like really angular, and there's like this. There's a kick drum and a snare and a hi hat and this bass line that's got, it's sort of all over the place, and it's like you've gone from like a wedding to it sounding really futuristic, and Eddie Grant's done that all by himself, so you don't have to, you know what I mean? Because to go from calypso to some odd 80s Detroit or Chicago thing in one fader flick's quite a brave move, you know what I mean? uh, but it's like, well, that tune does it, and I know he does it really well, and half the crowd will be like, yeah, soca, and half of them are like, oh, this is a bit cheesy, and then it'll flip in the end and everyone will be into it because it's like it's done so well, and so many of Eddie Grant's tunes are like that. There's another one called what's it called? It's about 17 minutes long. I can't remember the name of it now, but it's called Everybody Dance or something like that, and it's just crazy. And it's like it will keep people's attention for 17 minutes, and it's quite linear, so you can pull the bass out, and there's loads of that, like the whole thing of any kind of linear repetitive music, as you can, you can kind of jockey around with some of the frequencies just to kind of make it a bit more dynamic. But by the end of it, it's gathered such momentum, and it's like, wow, we've gone from like it being a bit like, oh, what's this, to literally everyone's like that, you know what I mean? And that's like, I find like sometimes just letting a record do that in a venue and just stepping back and go, no, this is, this, I need to trust in this record. And I know, because, I know because I've seen it before. I know all of you who are looking at me a bit weird now are all going to be like, shouting with joy in a few minutes.
Uh,
But that's the power of music, isn't it? I think
yeah.
you're like, that thing of not like, I know this and you don't, but like, this is brilliant and I can't wait to share it with you.
Yeah. and
Yeah.
and letting records do their journey. I mean, it's interesting talking about playing long records because I've been doing some hip hop mixes. I did an '80s one and then I did a '90s one. When I did the '90s one, because that was the first time I had a club night and I had money. It was really long. It was 5 hours, but someone wrote on there said it's all right, but you're playing the full songs.
Yeah, yeah,
And,
yeah.
I was like, oh, well, that's how I just explained. I said, oh, that's how I DJ. And what I used to play the instrumentals of the hip hop tunes, then play the song. And I said, oh, look, I'm just really reflecting how people were listening to the music, and I was playing and people were dancing to it then. And I guess I'm listening to a lot of the hip hop mixes that go on now, and and I love it. I love hearing all those cut things as well. But I guess, I mean, you DJ like that. I'm not one of those. Oh, you've got to play the whole song from beginning to end. But I love playing the majority of songs. Sometimes dropping the instrumental, then doing the vocal version. And yeah, I know you're similar to that, I think.
Yeah, and I think with a lot of hip hop stuff, it's obviously because especially with '90s hip hop, the format was quite strict. So your verse, chorus, whatever. So you can just like go from one to the next, and they're quite linear. So you don't necessarily have key changes and stuff to worry about. You know what I mean? But it's still like that third verse in that tune's amazing. You know what I mean? So yeah, I'm the same as you. I'd be a bit more like long, so I'd play an a cappella of one tune, or I might play a full tune, but you'd have three decks, so you play the vocal of one tune, you'd have the a cappella of that same tune on turntable 2, you have the instrumental of the next tune on turntable 3. Come to verse 3 of the first tune, you could switch to the a cappella of it, which you've already got in time, over the instrumental of the next tune, which you've already got in time, so that's seamless. and then while those two are going on, then you can get the vocal of tune 2 on turntable 1. Then you're into that, and you can kind of, so you're sort of overlaying elements of that. And obviously then when you've got an a cappella, you can just pull the beat out and emphasize certain bits of the lyrics and that kind of thing. But it's just a different way of doing it. And I
Yeah.
think yeah, for me, I think you're, I think if you're listening to different kinds of music, then, and a lot of the styles of DJing which we're familiar with, which are kind of, I suppose, called club DJing now. You got your hip hop style, which is very abrupt, which is very, quite technical, quite flashy. And then you've got your more house disco style of DJing, which is a lot more, smooth blends, getting stuff in key, not too not too in your face, you know what I mean? But I think like the records kind of tell you how to play them as well. So if like a Premiere, DJ Premiere production, because that's just so like that. If it makes you pull like a lizard face, as Mark Ray used to say, if it's got you doing that, you don't want to do a smooth blend with it. That's like, because it's like his beats are really like rubbing up against each other, and the cuts are like, they're all over the place. So it's like, yeah, well, that record's telling me to like slam in the next one. Whereas if it's more something like, I don't know, a more kind of jazzy hip hop thing or whatever, with like little Rhodes loops and a bit more, kind of not underground, but a bit, I don't know, like Asheru and Blue Black or something like that. You know what I mean? Where it's still like, it's rude, but it's like, yeah, this is like a bit more kind of soulful. We can, we can still. It just sort of lends itself a bit more to, music's a bit smoother, so the mixing style will be more smooth. You know what I mean? And obviously in the 90s we had there's a lot of great R&B, so you'd be dropping, I don't know, one of my favorites was Jade Every Day of the Week over Group Home, Superstar, or stuff like that. Or
Yeah, I forgot about that. We were doing a lot of live blends, weren't we, with the
yeah, there were
acapellas and things
loads,
like that. Yeah, yeah.
loads. But you'd have 3 decks, and you just bring 2 copies of everything,
Yeah.
and then you'd work it out on the night. You know what I mean? But it was just like that whole thing of you were always working.
Yeah.
But in retrospect, I think we were both playing hip hop in more of a disco style. It was just longer blends, and I think that, but neither of us have played particularly aggressive music. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? So it's just like there's always like we've always had like a subtle edge to like you want to reach a peak on the dance floor, but there's still something for people who want a little like, oh, that chord. You know what I mean? It's just like you're not just going for impact. There's but yeah, I think that an important thing is to kind of not, although it's important to have style as a DJ, I think it's important to be open to how the songs are asking to be played.
Yeah.
Like if it's got an intro, if it's got an outro, let it breathe. This is like, all right, that intro's amazing. I could mix into the drum break after the intro, but then I'm missing this whole fanfare. And obviously a fanfare is a really good reset. That's like a capital letter. An outro is like a big exclamation mark. Or so sometimes it's like that tune, I'm not going to cut it off no matter how, desperately I want to mix out of it, because that big brass band finishing on the end of that Ella Fitzgerald tune is like, people want to cheer and clap after it. You know what I mean? So you're allowing people, a bit of a breather, which is also great for just getting yourself that a bit of volume, headroom back for impact for the next tune. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that I'll mention this now because I guess it ties in between the difference between club DJing and festival DJing. I saw a little clip of Lauren Garnier, Doc Scott, the drum and bass producer, posted it up today, but it was about Lauren Garnier saying he classes himself as a club DJ because he's not necessarily at festivals you sort of do your thing. And I guess you have to have quite a different mindset. For me, with you, I mean, I got a chance to do like a big chill main stage, and I know I didn't do a great job on it. And I think I struggled doing it. And I can look back now in hindsight and think, okay, yeah, I think I was bringing my maybe small club sort of ideas and not really understanding how to do that main stage. But I think with you, I've seen you've got this. You've been brilliant at actually transferring, what you do to a main stage. I mean, how do you feel about that? I guess you do treat them differently, a big sort of festival gig to a club gig, or where's your head with both of those?
Yeah, I mean, to start off, I think the transition from like a small intimate residency in a basement or whatever to festivals. First of all, I think the fact that your club gigs generally, as your profile increases and experience and all that kind of thing, the venues get bigger. So it's not just like I'm playing to 100 people or 5,000 people here. It's like, well, I'm doing 100, 150, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 1,000, 1,500, for club gigs and stuff like that. And I've been really lucky to have, residencies in London at like the Forum and Coco, both of which are like 1,500 people. So you kind of like, you sort of adapt what you do in a smaller venue, and it's still feeling what there is on the night. You might be a bit more linear and a bit less all over the place, simply because you've got less individual connection with every single person there, and you kind of have to bring. It's almost like a bit of a roller coaster. You kind of have to get everyone on, and then you go on the ride. You know what I mean? But I think with festivals, it's like there's a different thing, and I think the main difference for me with club and festivals is that clubs, for a long time, or for a good 15-year period, I played all night at all of them, whereas festivals, you're there as part of an overall thing for the weekend. And I think the mindset of people at festivals is very different in terms of that they've clocked off. They can't be on their phones even if they want to, because there's no reception. They're in the field, they're walking around in pajamas and wellies and don't really care, or they're dressed up like a unicorn fish or whatever, and it's and they're being daft, and they're kind of they're being somebody else for the weekend, whether that's themselves or whatever part they're playing as part of this big theatrical thing, because obviously you're out in the open air, you've got the elements, you've got so much going on. And so I think that's the first thing, in a venue, you've got a very tight, controlled, situation where you've got 4 walls, a ceiling, a floor, some speakers, a bar, some music, and some dancing people. In festivals, you've got rolling fields, you've got nature, you've got clouds, you've got sun, you've got rain. It's we've also got a lot of people who are immersed in it for 3, 4, 5 days. So there are 2 different mindsets there, I think, initially. So I think with a club gig, I think you can really hone in on whatever you want to do that evening, and nothing else is really going to take away from that. If you're DJing outside and it starts raining, how are you going to deal with that? Are you going to go, oh, it's raining? Or like, oh no, the records are going to get wet? Or do you go, yeah, I packed like 10 different records about the rain. So at any given moment now, especially with USB, it's like, right, there's my weather folder. Right, it's raining. What day is it? Sunday. All right, I've got 3 tunes about it raining on a Sunday. There we go. I'll have that one because that's a tempo I'm at now. There we go. Boom. Everyone's celebrating the rain, rather than like, oh, let's go in that tent over there. So I think there are much more things going on both for you and the audience at a festival. I think at a festival, you've got to consider who's on before and after. So where you are in that kind of the structure of the day, whether it's other DJs or live acts or whatever. So you make sure, like, well, you research who's on before you and who's on after you. You have a look at who else is on at the same time, because there are a lot of distractions, and you see where you are in the whole site, because sometimes there's a lot of not competition, but sometimes the sound is bleeding between the stages. So you're like, well, I can't really play an a cappella for 5 minutes because I'm just going to hear from the tent next door. So I'm going to have to keep the sound levels up quite constantly. You know what I mean? So there's all these considerations. I think it's just looking at what's around you and then going, yeah, this is a big occasion, and a lot of people have really invested. People have been looking forward to this event for months, and obviously the whole event, rather than whoever happens to be on stage at that moment. But you can kind of, the same again with the festival. You've got to walk around and see what the demographic is, just see how people are, what the mood is. It's a bit like when you're playing at someone else's residency. It's like, well, who have you got here? Who have you brought in? Who are your people? Is it a family festival? Is it, what's the age range like? You know what I mean? What kind of, yeah, why are people here? You know what I mean? In for want of a less blunt kind of, overview. So I think it's getting into the spirit of it. It's obviously getting there a few hours before, and it's going. For me with festivals, I normally have my MC, quasi. Sometimes I might have visuals, so it's a bit more like a kind of all guns blazing thing. You know what I mean? So because you've got to grab people's attention.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit more like kind of like a peak time mentality, but still you can tell whether it's going to be like like whether you're going to have to really put on a show, or whether you're like putting on some nice tunes is enough because of how settled people are in the space. And that's all down to the layout of the festival. Some festivals, like, they have tents that feel like clubs, and they're great, because people are like, wow, I like this, I feel at home in here, like 200-300 people. So you can play according to that space. Other times when you're on the main stage, it's a bit like, well, it's a big stage here and I'm only small, so I need to like do a bit of that. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's different. I think it's different. It's difficult to demarcate between different styles of gigs because every gig is different.
Yeah.
And I think it's just really important that whatever gig you do, you try and connect with the event and the people who are attending and organising that event beforehand. So you're like, right, I get it now. Or this is what you had in mind when you booked me, you know what I mean? Or that kind of thing. So, all right, yeah, okay. Yeah, that sounds fun. Let's do that,
Yeah, brilliant. So, look, just getting into, I guess if somebody's up and coming and they're listening to this, one of the things for me when I first started, I mean, I was desperate to try and get turntables, and my mum pretty much bribed me to get into university and not get birthday presents for. And I got 2 Sound Lab belt drive turntables, and I saved up and bought a mixer, and that was my way. And so I guess I didn't have the greatest. It wasn't Technics at the time, but I loved having turntables and practicing. What was your journey like? Did you have how soon did you get equipment, and how quick were you able to practice, or were you able to just start DJing before having equipment?
Yeah, I started very slowly. So I started in 1984, and I was using the family's HiFi. So basically, I was using one turntable and a cassette deck. Then I think over the next few years, I gradually got another turntable. These were fixed speed turntables. I didn't have a mixer. So I had 2. At one point, I had 3 HiFis on the go, like all second hand. One was a massive thing that looked like a cabinet. And basically, I had 3 sets of headphones. And then I was basically using the volume on each hi-fi thing to basically as a mixer. So, and then I was trying to somehow manage to rig that up to record it, onto a cassette tape. I was doing lots of cassette tape edits.
You're brilliant. There's the hip hop pause tape edit that you did,
which
I know is on your Mixcloud, which is amazing.
That was like 1992. I think that was the last one I did, but that took me 150 hours. But yeah, about 1990, I got a Sound Lab deck, which I remember was 60 quid, that I paid for in installments from my local disco centre over 20 weeks. It really annoyed them because that was a professional DJ shop, and here was me, like age, however old. No, I was like 1988 when I did it. I was about 16 going in.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, yeah.
£1.50 every week, They were like, just take the deck. We're sick of you. You know what I mean? But I was using one belt drive deck with paper slip mats. And then I had a realistic mixer. I think the same one that everyone had around.
I think I had that. Yeah.
80s, yep.
Yeah.
And then one fixed speed hi-fi deck. And then I think I got 2 decks. And then early 90s, I think when I got a job in a supermarket, then I saved up for Technics, which were 250 quid each at the time, and then got a mixer. So yeah, I spent 10 years before I
Yeah,
had a proper DJ setup. You know what I mean? But it didn't matter because like I didn't know any other DJs. But it was like, well, and I could hear the mixes. I couldn't see other people mixing. But it's like, well, I could hear what you're doing. I buy the magazine so I can kind of see the equipment, but I can't afford that. But
yeah,
that's not going to stop me. You know what I mean? And I think that was like it was. Yeah, you just dealt with what you had.
yeah.
You know,
And
and
it's
that,
not a hurdle, is it? I think that's the
no,
thing. Sometimes when people get advice saying, "No, I can't afford to buy stuff," I'm always like, "Ah, it's not necessary to have the best thing. It's just, go, offer to work in a bar or do those bar gigs and practice there, or
yeah,
offer to work in a bar and then nab the CDJs one night or something like that. It's like
yeah,
there's
yeah,
ways to
yeah.
black, isn't there?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I suppose DJ equipment is a lot more expensive these days
Yeah,
in terms of like your Pioneer mixer or whatever. You're
yeah,
talking a couple of £1,000, but still, like if I was, you know, 15, 16 now, I'll probably be buying a digital controller. You know what I
yeah,
mean? It doesn't matter because it's all music. I think a
yeah.
lot of people get caught up in this format thing or like it's got to be really good quality. But in terms of the principle and building up your skills, uh, what I learned on and what I use now couldn't be further apart. You know what I mean? But it's still like you're training your ear, you're training, your mind and your whole musical kind of being in terms of what you're taking in and how you're dealing with it, and then what's coming out. You know what I mean? That the equipment doesn't really matter, and I think the worse equipment you have, the more, like I said before, your style comes out. I think if you have the same kit as everyone else, you're going to sound quite similar to everyone else, especially with the amount of YouTube videos or, here's how you change a tempo or here's how you do this with record box or whatever. And I think it's just like, yeah, just get on with it. It's definitely like, there's a lot of a DIY thing, but I think the whole thing of like dealing with technical issues, even if it's like, well, I want to achieve that, but I don't have this kit, you know, the same way as like, right, I'm DJing to 1,000 people. One of my two CDJs is broken. What do I do? Well, there's a microphone and you can have a gap. You know what I mean? It's just like, but you have to like, obviously, but in the background, you can be like, can you get me another CDJ, please? But it's just like, well, this, you know, but you know, practice playing on one turntable. I practice playing on one CDJ. Well, I've only got one at home because you can queue up the next track while one's playing. So if you're quite snappy about it, you can actually chop mix with one CDJ. You know what I mean? But
And
it's like,
it's great fun, isn't it? I mean, it's
yeah,
reminding me you saying that because the first paid gig I got, my friends put on a night, and then I was only 16, 17, and because I had records, they said, "Can you do?" But they hired, like a built-in. It was two turntables with a really rubbish uh, sort of pitch fade, but it's the first time I could pitch fade on records. I remember saying, "Oh, can I just get it early?" I think the shop opened at 10, and I went to get it so I could have all day. I remember putting Young MC, and I had Des O'Connor doing Neighbours, and I realised I was the same BPM and played that on the night, and then played Public Enemy after that. It's like when you're young, and
yeah,
it
yeah,
was all great fun. It wasn't, oh, I need to get. They use Technics. I've seen that. I need to get. I was just so up for DJing out with some equipment, on
yeah,
some
yeah,
equipment,
yeah.
isn't it? So yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and I think in the back then you had like Citronic, uh, kind of consoles with Garrard decks, and the pitch fader was literally like it was tiny. It was like the length of a matchstick. It had quite a wide range, so you had to be so on it, and it was yeah, it's mad, but there was such a variety of different turntables in those days as well, um, that you just had to, you just went in and I've never seen that mixer before. I've never used these decks before. I'm on now, okay, you know. So it's but I think you need those experiences, and I think going back to the bar gigs again, these are great opportunities to deal with frustrations and like, oh no, these decks aren't working again, or can we try the decks over in that part of the room? This week, oh, the cables don't work. Okay, well, how about next week I buy some cables and we try it, you know what I mean? Or like I brought a longer four-way so we can put that there, all these little things because, some bars will set stuff up and there's wires, you know, trailing everywhere, or you're on the bar and people think you're serving drinks and it's like, can I try that? Or can I try this? Or, perhaps like, okay, well, we'll have to keep it the same this week, but I'm back next week. How about we do that? But over the time, you end up finding a compromise with the places you're playing in, and obviously the more of a draw you are in terms of ticket sales or whatever, the more you can ask for these kinds of things in advance. But I think it's just great for people's skills. It's like, I'm DJing, this is your bar, you've got this set up like this, you know, next time could we try that? You don't have to be like, oh, that's awful, you know what I mean? You're an idiot. But it's just like, okay, would you awfully mind if we could, perhaps do that? Or, some clubs I used to play in all the time, the DJ booths are so kind of shocking that I actually end up paying for a new booth for me and all the other club nights that were there, because it's like, well, this booth is hollow and made of wood. I'm playing vinyl, so I'm going to pay for like a marble and concrete booth. It's like 1,500 quid, but it's like, I'm here every month.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm hiring in a sound system every month for like 750 quid. So this is a lot less hassle overall. You know what I mean? But there's stuff where you can just go, all right, well, I'll supply this thing for you. You know what I mean? This is like, if you've not got it and you're not interested, then yeah,
Yeah,
I think it's just finding these ways to make it
yeah.
work and working out what's worth your while, what isn't, and all these situations. But I think the bar gigs are such an important thing, because if you can entertain a room full of people who haven't got a clue who you are, and you can get yourself a regular gig somewhere just because of how you are personally. And this is also, you need to make friends with all the staff, and security especially useful, if you've got abusive punters. But then it's, and you can deal with people being nasty to you about your music and turn them round so they're dancing to it 2 hours later.
Part of the reason I did bar gigs before I did the first night that I did in Shaky Wig, and and it was a massive learning curve. And I think, I ended up I didn't get sacked like in a bad way, but they were, I think in Brighton, it was getting more and more housey, and I was playing reggae and hip hop, and they were asking me, just play a bit more house, a bit more house. And I was like, oh, I just really want to play. And it was always going down all right, but eventually they sort of said, look, we're just going to, if you don't want to do that, we're going to get a house DJ. And I was like, okay, that's very much that. But all of that experience was a bit to help me realize, well, I'm going to try and do my own night now. Let me see. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It's there, but let me try. But I'd had that. I remember, almost 9 months of doing a few regular gigs, which, could get some money to buy records as well, isn't it, at that point?
Yeah. I think it's great. And those bar gigs can be so different because, like, especially now with the proliferation of bars. When I started playing in, I think, 94 in Manchester, there were virtually no bars that had DJs. I was the... so I was kind of, it was quite an unusual thing, but it was still like, it was happening a lot, and you'd have some nights would be brilliant simply because of who came in. I'd be playing music from Venezuela, and then just two people like, oh, we're from Venezuela, you're playing Venezuelan music. And I'd be like, oh, okay. But those little things where like you're playing things which aren't expected and no one's bothering you, but to a couple of people, that's like, wow, they'll remember that for years. So I think sometimes it's nice to kind of, bring a wide range of stuff, because it's going to, even in a bar, if people are chatting to their mates, like, that's different tunes are going to resonate with people in different ways. And it's an odd one of being like present but not overbearing, you know what I mean, in terms of volume and stuff like that. It's making sure it's like, because if you can make the music as warm and kind of unintrusive as possible, you can actually get away with more, because people aren't noticing as much when you're playing the weird stuff. So it's like, there's a lot of kind of psychoacoustics involved in that as well. And I think it's just how you go about, it's how you express how I play your music. How I play my music is how I am as a person, you know what I mean? So I might go around the houses when I'm talking, and I do that musically, but I get there eventually in a way where people are a bit like, you did that. How did you do that? You know what I mean? Whereas other people might just go, I'm playing jazz now, deal with it. And I really respect people like that, who are just like, that's what you're having, So it's kind of like, I think it's just realizing who you are as a person and allowing that to come out. But I think
it takes time as well to figure it out, I feel, as well. But I think you can start. But I think that's what, I genuinely believe, like, almost from the first set I've heard you play to when I saw you the other week, it was like, in theory, there's nothing's changed. You were playing unusual tunes. You're playing tunes that I knew. You're playing tunes that I knew that I may not have thought of playing out. And it was like, oh wow, and you still do that. So
but that I think that's because before I did my first bar gig, I did 10 years solo as a bedroom DJ. So I'd already established my own weird little world that was informed by record shops, radio, magazines, you know what I mean? So that was like, I'd not really been to any clubs before I started going out. I've been to a few, but it was still like I was reading about stuff and listening to it on the radio and hearing DJs talk about it. So I was imagining what the world of music would be like. I was out in Stockport. I didn't really know anyone else who was into the music that I was into, but I could access it by buying, DJ Mag, Soul Underground, Echoes, all this kind of thing. Obviously, listening to pirate radio, and tapes and mix albums and all that kind of thing. So it was just like, I suppose you take what's available to you and you digest it and you work out what you want to do with it. And I had 10 years of doing that, you know what I mean?
You did your
So
10,000 hours, weren't you? You would put
yeah,
a
so
lot of work
yeah,
into some of you. So yeah,
yeah. So by the time I had a bar gig, I could play on 3 decks. I could play, reggae, hip hop, house, African music, Latin, techno, many different genres, to quite a degree of depth. So then it was applying that in the real world. And initially I was doing all sorts of hodgepodge things and putting things together just because I could. And that kind of mellowed out a bit because it's like, right, you've got to bring people with you rather than just be like, hey, I can play techno over reggae. It's like, yeah, great. But, well done, but everyone's just left. So I did a little bit, initially because I got into DJing for the whole kind of combination thing. It was a technically combining disparate kinds of music which appealed to me. And initially I was very overt with it, as with Cold Cut, they put, well, your equivalent of Des O'Connor over Young MC, you know what I mean? It is a little bit of like, look at me, I'm being wacky. And then it's like, hang on, no, I can tone these skills down a bit.
Yeah.
But I can play this Latin funk record with, Young MC, or I can, set fire to my Des O'Connor record or whatever.
Yeah. I've still got the Des O'Connor record, but
yeah.
But it's fun. I mean, I think that age when you're young, I was 17 and influenced by Double D and Steinsky and Cold Cut, it was all, you're just trying to figure what all of these things out. And almost like you, that was the first time I'm actually playing records out to people. And Public Enemy didn't go down very well when I played it that night, because I was in my own world thinking everybody's, loves Public Enemy. No, it wasn't quite like that. So yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting, but I think you need that thing of clearing the dance floor. I remember my first ever gig was 1990 at Stockport Student Union, and I don't know how I got the gig. I was studying there, and I played a load of disco, and I was quite obsessed by beat mixing. So I was mixing, but no one was dancing. You know what I mean? I was a bit like, I should have really been looking up rather than looking at the mixer. And then I played Barrington Levy, Here I Come. And suddenly the dance floor was full. I didn't know that was a big tune in Stockport. It probably wasn't, but it was just like, it was the right tune at that right time. And then it was like, okay, I've learned something here, you know what I mean? But it was like, because I've been there, but every other time I've been there, it was a 1990s student disco. It was like, a lot of indie music and stuff like that, which wasn't my thing, but there wasn't much else to do in Stockport. But it was just like, you have those gigs where you just have 1 or 2 points in the night. Oh, that worked. Okay. And then the next night, you'll be like, but I think that whole thing of, I'm going to try this. It didn't work. Okay. I'm going to try that. Oh, that sort of works. That really worked. You know what I mean? Because sometimes, like, I remember being at a house party once, and, I've always been that was when I was DJing out quite a lot. And this guy played, I don't know what he played, but he played like quite a soulful tune or something like that, and then he played Sound of the Police by KRS-One straight afterwards, and it was a tempo drop, and everyone went wild, and I was like, wow, this guy is getting a reaction from not even mixing. I'd like to do a bit of that. But then the next tune he played was equally different, and he cleared the dance floor. But it was just that little thing of like, sometimes you're out at other nights. I think it's really important to go and listen to other DJs as well, because you're like, you're getting to experience what it's like on the dance floor when you're round chatting with your mates, lost in the music, and then something comes out of the blue and you're like, wow, you know what I mean? So I think that's another really important thing. I think it's really important to establish a connection between, or a connection to what it's like to be on the dance floor, and obviously going out and being on that dance floor is really important. If you're DJing with other people, go and have a dance while they're playing. You know what I mean? So it's yeah, it's brilliant. But I think it's just like, for me, what's constantly engaging is an never ending stream of new music. There's a never ending stream of new music which reminds you slightly of old music, which then go, I remember when this was all fields, and that's not new, and let me show you this. So you're using a brand new release to maybe reach back into your collection and bring out something that connects with you that you wouldn't have pulled out otherwise. I think it's just, the whole thing about all the different subtleties of an event and the production and the technical things that go in. And every gig, you're like, oh, well, that worked well, or I'm going to try this. And if every gig you're trying something, then it's a never-ending journey, because you're always moving around all your reference points, and what you take as gospel isn't always true. You know what I mean? And this is why it's important to hear other people, because they'll have completely different perspectives. But I think it's just, it's being playful. It's enjoying it. It's working really hard at the preparation, and then when you're doing the gig, it's just like, obviously it's can be stressful. It requires a lot of concentration and work, but it's like, when you've made everything click, then you're off and flying, and you're hardly thinking about it. You know what I mean? You've almost reached that kind of alpha state in your brain where you're like, oh, I'm somewhere else now. And that, it's like meditation. You have to have a process with which you achieve that state of like, kind of relaxed confidence, where you're like, yeah, I completely believe in all the music I've brought with me now, and whatever I put on next, because it feels right, is going to go well, because I've achieved a connection with everybody else in the building. So it's
And
yeah, it's. But you can. What I really like about talking about it is that you can see it from so many different angles, and none of them is like the magic bullet. It's all just like, you kind of need to know all about all of this, but you'll never know it all. And that's what makes it so engaging constantly. That's you never stop learning, even just the music. Obviously, I'm never going to hear all the new music, but there's so much old music I've never heard. And I think, given the digital age, there's so much, you're aware of how little you know, just by virtue of the amount of music, which is also quite liberating. Because I remember, I'm sure you do, when you're like a 16-year-old DJ in the 80s, once stuff got released, it was old news. It's like, I only play promos. And this was me as a 16-year-old working in Quicksave. Nah, that's out as release now. I only play pre-releases. Like, what are you on about, you idiot? You know what I mean? Now I don't find out about stuff until 3 years after it's come out. I'll hear you play it or whatever. It's like, wow, this new tune. Yeah.
There was an element. I mean, hip hop for our generation was quite new, and there was almost a finite amount of music. It wasn't like there are
Yeah.
going to be 100 or 200 hip hop releases today. There'd be a
Yeah.
handful, and you'd almost, to a certain extent, you could keep an eye on everything. But I guess now, I mean, and like you said, it's quite liberating to know you're not going to own everything. You're not going to be. I think I was still quite competitive. I need to have every song, and I think I realized when DJing with you, like, you were coming every month, and it was like, oh god, you're playing so much tunes, and I had a realization, I'm not going to have the knowledge full stop on every record, on every song.
Yeah.
It's like, you've just got to accept, just fight, look for music, and just enjoy that part of it. Not, that competitive nature is always there with DJs, I think, but also it's finite, and find your own style, isn't it, within that?
And I suppose our approach to music is that we lean heavily on different specialist styles. So kind of what we do wouldn't be possible without a techno scene, a house scene, a roots reggae scene, a steppers scene, a hip hop scene, drum and bass, garage. So it's kind of like, and the competitive edge of DJing, whether it's like sort of turntablism, or sound clashes, or Roxanne versus Roxanne, or all that kind of thing, all the kind of rap beefs and all that. These are, the competitive nature often comes out within a specialist music environment, or one-upmanship in Northern Soul collecting, who's got the rarest records, who's got the latest, thing that no one's heard of, or whatever. So it's like, I think that's a necessary part of it, but I think one of the nice things about being a bit more freewheeling is you can kind of let some of that go, because I think some of that can be quite unpleasant, especially with like I think DJs covering up rare records. It's like okay, I can understand why you've done it within the context of your specialist scene, but you're putting yourself and your reputation as a DJ above the name and the recognition and the hard work of the artist who's made this record that you've just paid 1,500 quid for, that you're not telling anyone else about. You know what I mean? So it's, to me it's like okay, but then if it wasn't for that competitive spirit, a lot of these obscure records would not have had a second life in these modern collector scenes or whatever. So it's kind of, but I think it's great to be able to kind of acknowledge and pay respect to and be informed by all these different scenes, but then take a bit of an overview and go, there's loads of connections here,
Yeah,
and I love talking to people who are just into one kind of music, you know what I mean? Because it kind of, they'll always know things that you won't. But it's also like, I love being able to play this next to that because I know in the musical family tree that they are connected a couple of generations back down the line, you know what I mean? So
I
it's,
know for me how that helps is because those people have done the filter and they've done so much hard
yeah,
work, but you
yeah,
have to respect because they've dug through tons of stuff. And I guess I'm like you, that not sharing of music, I've always struggled with that because I always feel, mate, I mean, even before running a record label, I always feel there's an artist there. And I always feel if you share it, you'll always be the one that, oh, you were the first one,
yeah, yeah.
doing that, and you're letting everybody know. And if you're not sharing it, it's almost someone else may discover it and tell everybody, and everyone thinks they're the person that discovered it. But I think I'm like you. I like sharing, and the respect for specialist scenes. I was find that dubstep or grime, it's always inspiring because it almost comes out of nothing, a lot of those scenes, and
Yeah, yeah,
but they've
yeah.
got their influences there. And I love the story, like you do, I love the stories of how UK garage is connected to this, that, or the other, and it's come out of the UK. And of course for the UK drum and bass and jungle, it's just a brilliant mishmash of all the music that I love as well. So yeah.
Yeah, and I also think there's been so many good books recently, like Target's book and stuff like that. And there's a really good one, Who Say Reload, you know what I mean, the drum and bass
Yeah,
book. And it's just like these kind of first hand stories of people who were in it. They weren't just buying the records, they were in it. They were in it before the records existed. The same with, like obviously a lot of the hip hop history has been documented really well, and a lot of the New York disco history, obviously with Tim Lawrence and people like that. So it's just like we have access to the sort of the emergence of all these legendary scenes, be it like the punk scene in New York in the you know the the mid 70s, or the loft jazz scene around the same time, and the hip hop scene. It was, you can read loads of books about, saying, taking New York as an example, about New York within a certain time period from 5 or 6 different perspectives, and they all cross over because of certain people who were traversing, we're going between the scenes. People like Malcolm McLaren, obviously, people like Lady Blue, people, Fab Five Freddy and Africa Bambaataa, and and Grandmaster Flash and Blondie, all the CBGB things. So that's just like that's just kind of, for me, like reading a book about something I already thought I knew a lot about. It's like, this has completely changed the way I think about it, or just maybe want to go and listen to all those records all over again through the eyes of somebody who was there when they were made, because these are exciting records. But imagine being part of that, that sort of community and scene that gave rise, was the reason that these records existed. You know what I mean? But I think you're also constantly aware that these things are happening all the time, all around you. And like, even if it's new, like younger generations doing music that reminds us, say, like the new kind of, sort of broken beat and stuff like that. There was such a mutual respect between the different generations, and the same with the jazz dance thing. And it's great. I'm very privileged to know Colin Curtis, for instance, who's been in probably, an integral part of, I think, 5 music scenes, from Northern Soul through electro to, kind of deep house to jazz dance and all that kind of thing, and jazz funk through the years, and seeing how excited he is about all the new generations. It's like, all right, Colin's like 25 years older than I am, you know what I mean? He's been DJing since before I was born. And seeing that, concurrently, we have DJs in their 70s who are still really vital and vibrant, and you have DJs in their teens. You look at a lot of the, I don't know, a lot of the young piano producers and people, these are some of these kids are like 15, 16, 17. This is like amazing, but there is space in what we do, for all that, and for all of us to kind of be, if not be experts on it, because we'll never be experts on it, but in terms of being aware it's happening and being able to touch on it and if we want to find out more about it, we can really easily. And I
And
think, but when you meet these different people, like younger DJs or people from different scenes, and everyone's like so just into the fact that you're into something and involved with something that they're into as well, and they realize that kind of like I suppose the kind of over, for want of a different expression, the sort of left field underground scene in all its many forms over the years, going right back to the 60s, the 50s, and earlier. There are so many connections, you know what I mean? And I think the excitement in finding these connections, both musically and personally, with people in venues in the moment, or when you're in the studio, when you're doing a mix, this is what we're fighting for. It's like the little chemical reaction that happens when people meet, or two tunes rub up against each other and spark a little fire, you know what I mean? And it's like, wow, this is now more than some of its parts. And that's how we make the scenes grow.
yeah, definitely, and it's fascinating. I mean, we've just got there's a 15-year-old producer who sampled a Bamboos tune that came out. I think he was 3 or 4 when it came out, like a
Wow.
funk tune, and not a big Bamboos tune. So we were really surprised. We got the request to clear the sample, but it was really reminding. I guess that's what goes on connections, and I love what you were saying about Broken Beat, because I love, like, even Jam Supernova there. She's excited talking on the radio about stuff that I guess being older, we heard, we were buying and as coming out, but they're, discovering. And it was really reminding me when I remember shopping and at Kevin Beadle was working in Mr Bongo, and he'd tell me when I was buying a hip hop tune, this is the sample from that. And I was so excited that he was sharing that information and giving
Yeah,
me
yeah.
that information. And I love this cycle just continues. And it's all quite inspiring all the time, isn't it? Here.
Yeah. This is the thing, because we all have so much to learn from each other, and this is what and I think like what I found is a lot of the older generation are really interested in kind of the viewpoints and the context and the reasons, and just how the younger generation do what they do. Because you'd be like, all right, I can hear all these influences, but you've come at it from a completely different angle. How? You know what I mean? Because I think for a lot of us, it's kind of like how to you kind of keep your finger on the pulse. Is just like, well, I'm not involved in some of these scenes, or I don't know a lot of the younger promoters and collectives, but we're doing something quite similar. So there's a lot of common ground there. So we already have a starting point for a great conversation. But these are like the different ways. Like, how are you doing that? It's not all one way. And this is what I found, like, over the last few years has become really positive, especially with the resurgence of jazz as a kind of fiery music that's there to be danced to, you know what I mean? And the way that a lot of the, American jazzers are getting excited about what the UK youngsters are doing and all that kind of thing. But it's
You dropped
just so
Moses
much of it,
Boyd
yeah.
at the party at the Concord, and it went down really well. And sounds so amazing. So yeah.
Yeah, so it's just like, yeah, but there's so much going on now. It's like it's difficult even if you're full time in music. It's like I can't keep up with it.
Yeah.
But that's brilliant, because all these different scenes don't necessarily need, people who are into everything to, keep tabs on what they're doing, but it's just so brilliant it's all happening.
And I guess one of the things with DJ now is find your. I think you said it right at the start of this, is almost find that little community, isn't it, within what you're doing, and find similar people. And I think that's one of the best things. And you don't necessarily have to overlap, because like you said, in Brighton, Johnny was doing these reggae nights, and I knew those people. I knew Damien, they were doing more house and disco nights, but we were
Yeah.
all mates, and we were all into what we were doing individually, but we were all, we'd go to each other's nights. That is part of the community, isn't it? It's not just a genre specific scene or a DJ style scene. It's influences from everybody.
Yeah, and I think people like, you can. I think a lot of people who are into specialist things almost like have a bit of them that likes other stuff, but they've committed to that thing as well. You know what I mean? So there's loads of just. I think people I think if I think especially if you're dedicated to a kind of like a musical orthodoxy, um, and you're like, this is what I do. You appreciate the work that takes when other people do that with other styles of music. You know what I mean? So I think there's so much common ground with it between all these specialist scenes and the origins, musical origins, and sort of community origins of them. They're so connected anyway. You know what I mean? If you go back a generation or two, that just the genres are useful as labels within language or sections in a record shop if you're looking for something, but there's always like these fuzzy edges around every genre where they overlap with other things, you know what I mean? Or like, what section do I put that tune in? Often they're the best tunes,
Yeah, yeah.
like, yeah,
Where
yeah.
does it go? And again, look, I guess one thing it's we haven't mentioned it specifically, but with all the talking that we've been doing, I think one of the biggest things I know that you do is you're brilliantly organised. Like you mentioned about BPM, and I saw when you came down. I used to maybe just on pencil write the BPM on a label, but I saw you used to do the little stickers on there, and I
Yeah,
started doing
yeah.
that because it helped me just focus and be a bit more dynamic when I was DJing. You're brilliant at organising. I guess I don't know how nerdy we can get on this, but I mean, how do you do your records, like both digitally and do you do genres sections? You mentioned like you've got weather section for a festival. How deep do you go on all this stuff?
It depends because I think like I don't use record box. I should do really, but like for my digital stuff, I kind of just have them all in different folders and then folders within folders. And when I'm looking for something, if I can't find it immediately, then after the gig, I'm like, well, let me rearrange that because I was looking for that in soul, but I was thinking it should be in disco, you know what I mean? Or there's a P funk tune which shouldn't be in. So I do I kind of micro organize everything, so everything, all these records, the all over there, like we can see all the record shop dividers.
Yeah,
So it just means that if I want something, if I want a Sylvester record, I've got a Sylvester section, you know what I mean? So it's more like when you feel, yeah, that tune, I need to find it now. And I kind of organize it to how I think when I'm DJing, which changes sometimes. So if I've got a box and we'll just reach down here. So, I've got there's an album there. So that's all, so I'm A side, B side, C, D, F, G. That's a tempo, and I know that's A1, that's A2, that's B1. You know what I mean? So that I'll just put them all in order in my box. But then I might go right. I've got a lot of reggae today. I'm going to have all the reggae in one section, or I might be like sometimes if I've got two boxes, I'll keep it in tempo order, and I'll have like a friendly box and an angry box. So one's more like smooth, musical, celebratory, and then the other's like gnarly and like Danny Breaks or techno or underground resistance or new wave stuff and quite angular music. And sometimes, so I'll go right. Well, I'm going to do 20 minutes in this box. We'll hit a groove, and then the sun's going to come out, and I'm going to switch to the happy box for a bit, and then it's a bit too twee now. Let me go, a bit gnarly again. So it depends. I think with the nice thing about vinyl is you can kind of rearrange it as to how you feel on the night. You know what I mean? I take a few dividers with me, and then it's like I'll just write, warm up, and then once the warm up's done, I can just put those records away, so there's less choice. Because I think sometimes when you're DJing, there's so much choice, you end up not playing the record you really wanted to play. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So yeah, it's different. Every time is different, and I think every gig, if I ever get frustrated by not being able to find a tune that I know I have with me, I'll make a mental note of that, and then I'll reorganize my filing and put it where I should have put it. But yeah, I have certain things like I have folders of the music by weather. So I've got rain, sun, clouds, snow, storms. A folder for when it stops raining and the sun comes out again. And then days, normally like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Saturday afternoon, Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, sunset, Sunrise, like the little lyrics, or there's tunes that might, that might just mention a time. There's loads of midnight tunes which I'll play just before or just after midnight on New Year's Eve. You know what I mean? Uh, and then other things like places. So I've got a massive folder of tunes from Manchester. I've got a folder of tunes from Brighton, from Birmingham, from Nottingham, and that's not necessarily tunes that mention those places. But here's just like, I'm just going to drop a couple of local tunes that might be well known, that might not be.
You played Ocean Wisdom, didn't you, at the
Yeah,
Concord?
yeah,
And I've
yeah.
forgotten about that tune. It's like, that's such a good tune. So yeah,
But that's I mean, that was one of the first tunes I've heard of his. But also, obviously, the first lyric is straight out of Brighton, so it's just like, I know this is going to hit home. You know what I mean? But obviously, because his profile and high focus has built up so much, I knew that would be a big tune. But there's certain times where you just need to kind of make an impact. It's like, I'm in Brighton, you know what I mean? So it's like it's nice to pay respect to where you are by playing a few tunes. And sometimes you'll play a tune and there'll be someone in the audience. When I was in Norwich recently, played at an amazing club called Gonzo's Two Room, like 150, 200 capacity, function one system, amazing. Charlie Dart loves that venue as well. And I played some Deftex and Taxi records, which are like, and I know there's a big roots reggae scene in Nottingham, so I played some heavy roots, because there's a bit of sound system culture there, and there has been for many, many times. And Mark from Deftex has introduced me to all that when I used to play there a lot. But I didn't realise that two of Deftex were in the building. So they came, oh, bloody hell, you played that. It was their first tune from like 91 or something. I said, yeah, the vinyl. And they're like, bloody hell, I've not seen that for like, over 30 years. And Taxi, same again. That's another really good Norwich act, very soulful, very underappreciated, I think, as well. Like quite trippy, quite sparse, almost like a slightly emptier Smith and Mighty. You know what I mean? It's sort of like, I've been obsessive about their music for years. So it's just like, right, I'm playing in Norwich. You have to, do that. If I'm in Birmingham, I always play some, old Brummy reggae or a bit of different drummer stuff, or or Liverpool or whatever, just wherever you are, it's just like you can find some local music. And I think it's a nice nod because there will be a few people who clock it, even if it's not mega obvious.
Yeah.
But it's also like it makes you kind of think about where the music comes from. And sometimes you're like, what? I'm playing in Aberdeen. I haven't got any music from Aberdeen. Let me do some research. You know what I mean? So it's really interesting, and I've and sometimes you meet producers who like I met a DJ called Josh Kilimanjaro, recently in an airport hotel in Amsterdam, and he was like, "You played in Dundee years ago, so next time I play in Dundee, I'm right. You're from Dundee, are you? I'm going to play some of your, you know what I mean? It's like these little connections where you're like, oh, right, that's not obvious where you're from, but and so they're just these little. Same again. It's just another level to an event where you're like, that's another thing I've got to. It's not obvious, but I'm going to have to put in somewhere. I want to scratch that itch. But I mean, we're going back to folders, but it's just all digitally. As I get more and more stuff, I just make more and more folders.
Yeah. Do you sort out? I know for me, because I made the switch to digital now, and I'm using USBs, and I just sort out a folder for the night. And I've got my other music there, but I almost try and stick to that because I get worried if I don't. You're always just trying to look for everything too much. I don't know how if you're playing it at night, have you sorted it out in a this is this night's folder, or do you just quite freestyle within the folders that you've done?
It depends. Sometimes I'll just have. I think with festivals, when they're shorter sets, sometimes I'll just pull like 60 or 70 tunes, almost like a record box worth. So I did a gig last week where I think I played one tune that wasn't in my folder for that night. Other times I'll get quite structured with it, and I'll have a folder for a night, and it'll be like, I'll label them all. So it'll be like, there'll be warm up, chunky, slow it down if you want to go from faster to slower, but some big slow tunes, like soulful tough, because as you get more, you end up like, it's like, rather than just having house, there's like, well, there's masters at work dub style, there's disco sample house, there's kind of, I don't know, hip house or whatever, you know what I mean? Chicago 80s, Detroit 80s. It's kind of what, I don't know, as you DJ, when you're going through different moods, it's like, well, I do this naturally, but how would I label and explain those moods and then turn that into a folder so I can actually mimic the way I think when I'm DJing in quite a rigid format, you know what I mean? So it's just like, and sometimes like you get music which is a certain genre, but you often play with other genres. So it's like, well, I'll put it in there, or I might put it in two folders, but I've not really got into like tagging and all that kind of thing, or using record box so I could just find the tune by typing it in on the CDJs. You know what I mean? I've seen other DJs going. It's like, yeah, I need to spend a week getting my head around that. But yeah, I've kind of worked out my own little weird and
Yeah,
wonderful way, which is
yeah.
pretty much just an extension of
What you did with vinyl, I guess, isn't it?
yeah, and
Yeah,
how I started
yeah,
off in the 80s, which is
yeah.
basically writing the BPM on a record, and the BPM it starts at and the BPM it ends at. I write the time signature. I write any structural properties of the record, like especially if it's a bit unusual, like it might start on the beat 2 of bar 3 or whatever. So if you're in the mix, you're like, I can just count that and start it, and I know the drop's going to happen right on, rather than be a bit off. You know what I mean? When you're overlaying your tunes, write what the ending's like. If it's got a nice intro, whether that intro has a tempo or whether it's tempoless. The same with the outro. You know what I mean? So you write the properties. It's just like you're labeling the structure of every tune, so that then you can freestyle it. So as long as what you do is in key or whatever, or because some tunes like you can mix in polyrhythms as well. So it's just like, oh right, well this one is like it's in 6/8, so I can play this at 137 BPM and 100, in 4/4, so I can get, I can kind of get between the tempos in a way that's a bit trippy, but it's another kind of, ooh, how did that happen? You know what I mean? So there are little, yeah, time signatures are especially useful. So certain time signatures that I'll have in their own folder, because these are really good ways to kind of get between tempos or play tunes at different tempos at the same time. You know what I mean? So you can play a drum and bass tune over a house tune if the house tune is in 6/8. But then it completely reconfigures how you hear the drum and bass tune, because it turns it from 174 into like 126. You know,
Yeah.
but so
I mean,
it's
you're a master at that, aren't you? On levels of genres and taking people. Like there was like an Irish type thing that you were playing at the Concord, and it was like, you do stop and then, have we got here? And everybody's going crazy to it as well. So
yeah, yeah.
it's brilliant. Like that's what I love about you. I guess just I think we may be moving to time maybe to try and summarize a little bit. I mean, so
Okay.
for me to speaking to you, I think, and add your bit at the end from speaking to you. You spent a long time before you were actually out there DJing. I think there's no harm, put in the work, put in the 10,000
Yeah,
hours,
yeah,
and do your thing. Not worry about equipment. Just do what you can do within what you've got. And I love, I guess, how you explained it is find your community and figure out a way to do that. And I guess that's going to events, pushing to get gigs, find out, chat to other people, and then once you're there, I guess you're going to make mistakes when you first start DJing,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
yeah, and not worry about those. I mean, what would you say if people listening to this? How would be, anything more to add, or is that?
Yeah, I think like you've got to create situations where those mistakes can happen, because they'll all need to happen once, and it's better if it happens in a bar than on the stage in front of 20,000 people or whatever. You know what I mean? So it's just like, I think the main thing is like is if you're really kind of captivated and engrossed and completely consumed by the energy of music, or in general, or certain kinds of music, it's just be around other people who feel the same. Because even if you're in a different scene, everyone has their own story. And I think if something resonates you to an extent that you want to kind of dedicate a significant portion of your time to it, then there's a journey before that which has led up to that point. You know what I mean? And it could be just a generational thing where, you know, the lyrics and a certain kind of music, or just it really brings together all the stuff that you've been excited about over the years, and then suddenly, or you might just be like, well, I like a bit of this and a bit of that. I don't know what to call it, but a few of my mates feel the same way. That's how genres are created. You know what I mean? So I think it's almost like, it's don't overthink it. It's just get stuck in with like-minded people, do the events, make mistakes, take notes, be nice to anybody you're working with. If there's money involved, make sure that people get treated fairly. You know, just make sure that everyone, you know, if people are contributing to the night in some way, it's like they got looked after, get them a few drinks, give them some money, make sure they got a taxi, all that kind of thing. Um, yeah, I think the main thing is just making sure that everybody, because if you're doing an event in a space, then you've got the promoter, you might have technical staff, you might not, depending on if it's a bar or whatever. You've got all the bar staff, you've got security. Just take the time to meet everybody and remember everyone's name and kind of chat to everybody, because then I think the amount of goodwill which will come your way just because you've given people the time of day and a bit of eye contact will really go a long way in terms of helping you achieve what you want to achieve in that venue. Even if it doesn't work out there and your and the venue's values or aims aren't aligned, it's like, well, I've tried that. Okay, this isn't working out. However, next time I do it, I've now got a really, you know, a growing checklist of things that I need to do. You know, and obviously what that checklist is, I've got my own, and it's very long, but it's still like I've internalized that now, and that becomes instinct into, yeah, this feels right, or I'm not sure about that. You know what I mean? So I think it's just it's it's working with people, playing to your strengths. Obviously, if you've got, you know, you might have some people who are really good at decor. You might have some people who are really technical with equipment. You might have some people who are really good at connecting people. You know what I mean? So I've always been lucky or been drawn to people who are very uh, obviously who have the same skill set as me, like being quite technical and being really nerdy and musical. But I was also, you know, very drawn to people like Mark Ray or Barney, who were really good at bringing people together. You know, because that wasn't, the networking thing wasn't something I was particularly good at or drawn to, but I entered their circle, and then suddenly I was in this orbit of amazing creative people. So sometimes it's just like you can become part of somebody else's team, you know. So it's just like, I think just be open to, yeah, don't be too set in your ways. I think as well, it's like you've got to be flexible. You've got to, you know, no one's going to get it right all the time. It's make mistakes, allow other people to make the mistakes. How you deal with conflict and friction and issues, just like, you know, how's that person feeling from their perspective? Why did they do that? You know, it's just like, because everyone has their own reasons for behaving and acting in certain ways. So I think it's just like some basic interpersonal stuff overlay with your own creative excitement, you know, and then where that meets everybody else who's in your circle, you know what I mean? And if you're not in a circle, then go to other people's nights, you know, chat to people, because I think if you carry enthusiasm and love for for what you're into and what other people are doing, and that appreciation, you'll very soon be surrounded by like-minded people, and then you're plugged in, and it's like, right, well, can I help? You know, can I warm up, or can I help set up the sound system? And, you know, if you're a DJ, you don't even have to DJ. It's like, okay, well, I need to learn the tech side. Can I shadow the sound engineer at your club night just to see what they're doing? You know what I mean? All that kind of thing. And it's just like, people who've been doing the same thing for years and years of the job love passing on their knowledge and experience to uh, younger people, or not even younger people, but just people who are eager to learn, because there's an exchange of information, and there's a respect, and there's also like, okay, this art form is not dying if this knowledge is being passed on. You know what I mean? So I think it's finding your place, finding other people who are excited about it, and go, right, what do I need to learn, and how do I do that quickly, and who do I need to speak to in order to do that?
And you can really improve yourself, can't you? And I think, I guess, I mean, even as you were saying that, I think one of the things I remember from booking DJs before booking you, I was quite militant about keeping the price of the nights quite low, and then I'd always end up losing artists because I just can't you just play for 150 quid? And I remember when you were getting bigger, and then you were getting offered more money to play Brighton, and you were talking to me and saying, "Look, I'm getting offered money," and I said to you, "Oh, look, I don't want to put the price up," and you said, "Oh, Rob, can't you just put it up by £1? I'm sure it won't make a difference." Because and then you tell me, look, I've got the train. It's not. I'm not driving from London and then driving back that night. And then you really explained it to me, and it's like, oh yeah, you should be getting paid. You've been almost doing a favour for me all of this time. And that was after doing club, I've been doing clubs for maybe 4 or 5 years at that point. It was like, oh, I can book the DJs I like, because if they're coming from America, I'll just put the price up and everybody's fine about paying it because they want to come to the night and see that DJ. And that was a massive learning. And I'd lost Basement Jacks, Groove Armada, because I was just like, oh, go to the other promoters because I want to keep the price the same. But it was just a thing. I was in my own world, and I think I'm always grateful for you with that, because you made me understand. There's a bigger thing of what's going on with all of this, and you saw your value as well, and got me to understand maybe a value that was going on with the nights that I was doing. It doesn't have to be £2 to get in, all the time. So yeah.
But isn't that where because we're talking about like the confluence of like local nights and a local perspective, and you're going, right, we've got some regulars here, and also how local people see your venues that you're booking, because other nights at that same venue might be doing that for like £3 or £4 or whatever, and also like, well, I can see, well, I can charge that much in Nottingham or this much in London, so this is kind of, we've tested it already. Yeah. And you can push it up a little bit, what I mean? But I think you always do that with your hometown gigs. I think every promoter's like doesn't particularly want to alienate people, and I think it's an important consideration. But it's still like, well, if you keep the price too low, out of fear of putting people off coming to your night, there's then less money to pay the people who are working at the night. You know what I mean? And I think you have this little catch-22 where, obviously, you don't want to do crazy ticket prices, but you want to be able to pay, your visiting DJs. You want to pay for their hotel, their any visas or whatever, and all that kind of stuff. You want to be able to take them out for dinner, but also then you want to be able to pay whoever's warming up or yourself, and then you want to pay who's doing the flyering properly and doing the printing. And it's a weird one. Yeah.
We started booking all Mark Ray and all the Grand Central lot, because it's like, actually, yeah, they're all coming down from Manchester. Let's just put the price up, because we were loving what Grand Central were doing, but it was like calling someone up and saying, can you just play for 150 quid and come from Manchester? And it's like, oh, I'm going to lose money doing that. So,
yeah. But it's, but these are all things, we all have these little things, all the time, where you have an approach which is informed by what you've done before. But I think if you keep open enough, every week you're tweaking. Every event you do, everything you do, every radio show you do, every record release, you're like, we're basing our approach on what worked before, plus our instincts about what's appropriate now. Oh, that was a bit off. Or that went really well. So it's just like you're constantly adapting your approach, which I think is like, I think especially as you progress, one of the things is not to get too kind of fossilized or stuck in your ways in terms of like, new music's rubbish or this or that. It's like, no, you've got to, times change. And I think like there's a joy in seeing how subsequent generations approach basically the same thing you were doing 30 years ago. You know what I mean? It's like everything's different now. How are you doing this? This is amazing. You know what I mean? Well, you've got computers, you've got laptops now. You're not having to use, the family's hi-fi or cassette decks or stick things together with tape or, make it. The only way you can loop is, you don't have a sampler. You've got to cut this cassette tape open and make a little loop and stick it back together and hope you got it in time. You know what I mean? And then you can rap over it, but it's still like,
and access to music as well, isn't it? It used to be very expensive, didn't it? So those barriers have come down as well, isn't it, to have access to music. So,
but I think also like I think the there was less music around back in the day. I think it gave, but it seems like everyone who's of our generation grew up in similar circumstances in terms of like everyone was using, rubbish kit that they saved up for. Everybody was, doing a paper round to buy 1 record, 2 records a week or whatever. But the enthusiasm and the fire was there, and we were all listening to the radio. But that was a common bond. And I think nowadays there are so many different avenues. And obviously, as a younger person, you've a lot more time to kind of, get lost. With less responsibilities, you can spend more time getting into whatever you're getting into. And I think it's easy to moan about these kids online on the screen or whatever, but it's like no, what I'm interested in is in connecting and finding out what these people the people who have had a very different life experience to me, but with so much in common. Let's start with the common bits and then work out from there. You know what I mean? But I think like the fun, and especially when you're in your late teens, early 20s, and how life is like so very different before like the weight of just all the stuff you deal with when you're older kind of settles. Before stuff gets too stuck, it's like try stuff, hire out that pub beer garden or this little community centre and put on a night. Loads of club nights start from just mates doing parties for themselves, you know what I mean, or house parties or whatever. It's just like the opportunities are there, and and obviously for young people who are students who are like, you've got a ready-made party hungry audience. You know what I mean? But it's brilliant. I think the excitement and the opportunity of starting out on that journey of like, I'm going to give this a go. You know what I mean? And then all the mistakes and all the experience that kind of come very quickly within a couple of years. You know what I mean? And I've seen this a lot with certain younger DJs who started out being really nervous, and then 2 years later they're smashing it, and it's like, wow, you've really put the work in. You know what I mean? But it's
and be patient. It's not overnight, is it? This stuff. It's be patient.
No, but it's also really obvious to see when people have that hunger.
Yeah.
And I think there's a certain amount of focus and dedication you need. But it's seeing also how people's personalities and their strengths come out. Like I say, whether it's someone who just pulls together and connects people, like the classic promoter, whether it's other people just like, I'm just going to nerd out on this sound system. Or, I'm going to build an amp. I'm going to I'm going to learn how to mix. Right, I'm going to go record shopping. I'm going to start a fanzine. All these little things they're all like, but everyone's like, right, I've done this. Look what I've done. It's like, oh, I've done this. It's a team thing, and it's building that family thing or finding that family and joining in and going, hey, this is great. Can I help? You know what I mean? And I think that's like once you're in there and you're making yourself feel useful and part of something, which is, it's very special, isn't it? Because you have that community thing there, you have friendship groups, you have a support network, and it's all in the name of celebrating all this amazing music that we're, whether it's people making music or discovering the music and sharing it. It's like that never gets old.
It's brilliant. And I mean, I think that's a brilliant way to sort of end this. It just reminds me when you just said that as well. It was brilliant, the speech you did at the end of the gig in the Concord in Brighton, where you just said, oh, look, take this feeling that you've got for the rest of the week. It was just it's the thing that we love about music, isn't it? You can just lose whatever troubles are going on, and that reminder about taking that and that energy and that feeling is really what a lot of this is about, isn't it? Connecting with a wider audience, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's not even in a musical context, it's in a human context. And I think that sometimes when you're on the dance floor and you've found your friends and you're all into the same kind of music or experience, there's lots of people who've never really had an opportunity to experience like a really sort of heightened feeling of togetherness on a dance floor in a warm and welcoming kind of familial club situation. So it's like this kind of the sort of commune feeling we have, what I mean, of like, right, we were together, it clicked. So it's kind of like, that's not just for people who go to that club. It's like you have to take that back home to your housemates, to your family, to your workmates or whatever, and just try and like bring that feeling, because like it's you're trying to, as a performer, you're trying to bring in you're trying to uplift and connect with people. But that's not obviously, Quasi said that a lot on the mic. It's like everybody in that place is bringing some kind of vibe from outside. Hopefully, we've got a little pot on the go and we've made something really tasty that then is going to expand and bubble over into the rest of wherever we are. You know what I mean? And it's not, yeah, it's not just about, you know, the music thing. It's this, you know, we all need support and we all need reassurance and we all need kind of togetherness and connection. And these days there seems to be so much awareness of things that are kind of destined to try and erode that and wear it down. You know what I mean? So I think, like, you know, in our everyday existence, we need to also like apply these same principles of, you know, sharing and being interested in each other's experiences and connecting. And I think it's like, obviously the music inspires a lot of that, because you're like, you're constantly listening to other people's experiences coming out from you from a speaker, and it's resonating with you, you know. So it's like, this is somebody else. This could be a feeling that somebody had 60 years ago, and the way they're singing that song and the way everyone's all coming together, you know, that's a communal experience captured. You know, it's resonating with you down the line in another continent decades later, and it's like, yeah, we can pass this energy around. You know what I mean? We can kind of like, you know, let's. I think that the word I'm looking for is catalyst. You know what I mean? You're just trying to like um, keep things bubbling in a positive way. And I think there's so much kind of darkness in the world and in the news and all that at the moment, and it's like it can be overwhelming to think, what can I do? But what you can do is just be kind of respectful and appreciative, and notice the people who are around you. And these could be friends, people you live with. These could be people who you're buying drinks from in a shop. You know what I mean? Just giving people the time of day and like, hello, how are you? And just a little bit of that. Because, you know, I've had it in the past when I've been grumpy and someone's just said, hey, how are you? And I'm like, oh, you know, snap out of it. Yeah, I'm all right. Yeah, thanks. I was a bit grumpy. And now you just like bumbling into my life for a split second and giving me a smile is, you know, I'm going to do that to other people now, because that's really shaking me out of whatever, you know, little grumpy mood I was in. So it's, yeah, yeah, it's just spreading it, isn't it, in
Yeah.
whatever way you can.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. Okay, that's great. Look, Andy, thank you so much for putting time aside for this as
No,
well.
it's
I'm
a real
sure,
pleasure, Rob.
yeah, I'm sure lots of people will get some great information from this as well. And of course, check if you haven't. I'm sure a lot of people listen to this will have heard Mr Scruff before, but definitely, I think without bias, you know, you really are an inspiring DJ. And if you're into DJ, you could just learn a lot from watching you DJ as well. So yeah,
No, it's well, we all learn from each other, isn't
yeah,
it? And I think that's it. It's that joy of like, here, you know, I've heard this. I'd love you to hear it, and then, you know, and it's and one of the things I really like is when you're DJing is like, you might discover something in inverted commas, uh, and it might be something that's really old or that you don't know about, or a certain kind of music, and you're playing it, but there'll always be someone in the audience who are like, "That's my dad on that record," or "Wow, you played that tune from that town in that year, you know, that was big with my family back in the day." And you're like, "I just played it because it's a good tune. Tell me more about it." You know what I mean? These are really interesting ways to connect with people as well. But it's, yeah, it's all about connections and kind of, I think, just trying to like check on each other and just lift each other up. You know what I mean? It's yeah, it's ongoing and it's hard work, but I think it's really rewarding when you stick at it.
brilliant. Okay, all right. Thank you, Andy. Nice one.
All right, cheers, Rob.
All right.